Chapter 447. Just by standing there, the contestants from the noble house and the School of Magic showed a completely different temperament. Although it was impossible to see through them, the contestants from the noble house were extravagant on the outside. The contestants from the School of Magic were all like scholars, exuding an intellectual aura. In fact, everyone on the stage was a proud son of heaven. Even Panduola Doragon couldn't be said to be a crane in a flock of chickens. Following their appearance, the audience cheered incessantly. Obviously, each of them had a large number of fans. Dake felt the atmosphere several times more fanatical than the Easter Duel Festival, and couldn't help but squint slightly. Watching the competition and personally participating in it were two completely different feelings. Originally, he was actually more willing to watch the competition, but after tasting the deliciousness of the duel, he began to be more willing to participate in it. Unfortunately, this wasn't his occasion. At this time next year, if he could still be the best among the second years, then it shouldn't be a problem to represent the noble house in the school championship. Website: https://mvipcanshu. VIPs. For now, he was happy to learn from the experience of watching the competition and prepare in advance for future duels. In an incomparably fanatical atmosphere, the first round of duels officially began. The first to fight were the second years from the two schools, followed by the third and fourth years, all the way to the sixth years. Dake gradually focused on watching the competition, trying to enrich his battle strategies and ideas for the construction of his deck. The battles between the second years didn't give him too many surprises, but from the third years onwards, his horizons had been broadened. The third year of the School of Magic, senior sister Winnie Scardy, showed an extremely oppressive strength when she was serious. Dake had fought with Tom Nixon, who had eliminated her, in the Easter Duel Festival, and won in the end. But at this time, sitting below the stage and watching the battle, he only had one feeling. It seemed that even if he were to duel with this descendant of the Winter Sage with his current deck, he could be crushed like a storm. That already very strong third year of the noble house was completely not enough to look at in front of Winnie Scardy. Winnie Scardy's strength had completely surpassed the standard of a third year. After the first 6 rounds, I should be able to see her challenge those of a higher grade, right? Dake could not help but think. The third and fourth year contestants of this year's Magic Engineering Academy were all existences that transcended their levels. It would be difficult for the House of Nobles to win in such an environment. With Winnie Scardy's victory, it was finally time for the duel between the fourth years. Panduola Doragon's appearance caused another uproar. Dake waved at Panduola, who was looking at him from the stage. Then he witnessed the tragic scene of Panduola violently beating up a fourth-year student from the aristocratic academy. This year's Mage Institute is really too strong. Dake carefully observed the duel and realized that Panduola didn't use fusion in this duel. He didn't know if it was because he couldn't complete it or because he didn't choose to use it. In short, Panduola won as expected. After these 2 consecutive defeats, the morale of the aristocratic house fell even further. However, neither side's contestants were affected. In the fifth year's duel, the contestant from the aristocratic academy finally defeated the contestant from the Mage Institute, and even the score. In the sixth year's duel, which could be considered the final victor, the sixth-year contestant from the aristocratic academy and the sixth-year contestant from the Mage Institute engaged in an incomparably fierce and bitter battle. The strength of the two sides was very similar, and there were countless ways to resolve the situation. A series of special moves were even more dazzling. After a dozen or so rounds, the curtains finally fell on this evenly matched and bitter battle. The sixth-year contestant from the aristocratic academy won by a single move and finally won this round. The supporters of the House of Nobles danced wildly after such a difficult victory. However, the supporters of the School of Magic didn't fall behind. They cheered for the School of Magic with thunderous cheers to encourage the School of Magic. The outcome of this round could not determine anything. The following rounds were still important. After the first round, Senior Judy once again summoned the symbols of the 4 academies and moved the needle to select the Academy of Fools and the Academy of Knights. This was also a unique round of duels, which made the spectators exclaim in satisfaction. In the end, the Academy of Fools was a dark horse and defeated the Academy of Knights by a score of 3-2. In the eyes of the audience, the Academy of Fools was not an ordinary academy. The Academy of Knights had actually lost to the Academy of Fools. This was undoubtedly a disgrace. As for the spinach fans who had joined the Academy of Knights, they had suffered even more losses and were cursing wildly. There was a trace of chaos in the audience. However, the security of the Shungmalian academies was naturally not low, and it was far from being a place where one or two people could act rashly. Thus, the trace of chaos quickly disappeared. Immediately after, the third round of the competition began, and the audience's attention was completely diverted to the competition itself. The fateful duel between the Aristocratic Academy and the Academy of Knights sparked intense discussion. After 3 rounds of the competition, the stadium entered intermission time. Dake and his classmates went to the cafeteria to eat together. Along the way, the boys could not hide their excitement. In the fateful duel between the Aristocratic Academy and the Academy of Knights, the Aristocratic Academy won by 1 point. In the 3 rounds in the morning, the Aristocratic Academy won 2 rounds and the Academy of Knights lost 2 rounds. For the students of the Aristocratic Academy, this result was very much in line with their wishes. The students of the Aristocratic Academy, who had fought fiercely with the Academy of Knights for several years, could not wait to see the Academy of Knights fall to the bottom. But the Knights were strong and courageous, and would not be defeated. They should have a strong belief that they would return to the battlefield even if they fell to the bottom. After lunch, the 4th round between the Academy of Knights and the Academy of Magic Devices went against the trend and defeated the Academy of Magic Devices with a score of 3-2. But then, in the 5th round, the Academy of Magic Devices defeated the Academy of Fools in a crushing manner and turned the tables. In terms of overall wins, the Academy of Magic Devices was even higher than the Academy of Knights. The Academy of Knights, who had won 7 rounds, and the Academy of Magic Devices, who had won 8 rounds, turned their attention to the final round of the equal-level duels. The Aristocratic Academy versus the Academy of Fools. Since the Academy of Fools could not even defeat the Academy of Magic Devices, which had lost to the Aristocratic Academy, logically, they should not be able to defeat the Aristocratic Academy. But the facts spoke louder than words. In the battle between the Aristocratic Academy and the Academy of Fools, the Aristocratic Academy had suffered a crushing defeat. The Academy of Fools went against the trend, and with a wild reputation, the Aristocratic Academy was relegated to the mortal world. In the end, the Aristocratic Academy won 8 rounds, tied with the Academy of Magic Devices, and tied for first place for the time being. The Academy of Knights and the Academy of Fools each won 7 rounds, and were in last place. But in reality, the difference between first and 4th place was only 10,000 credits. A successful leapfrog challenge could easily make up for this gap. If they wanted to truly win, cross-level challenges were the key. The contestants from the 4 academies all aimed for the cross-level reward, and secretly accumulated strength. During dinner, the students discussed this matter intensely. Students from each academy provoked each other from a few tables away, wishing they could beat each other's brains out. In the end, it evolved into a private duel. One by one, the duels took place in the open space outside the cafeteria. The intensity of the duel was no less than the competition in the field. The students from the 2nd to 5th years were the most agitated. Although they kept to the bottom line of the school rules, the cursing continued to rise. The 6th years restrained themselves because they were about to graduate. The 1st years couldn't fight at all. Dake, Doran, and the others wandered between the gaps, eating melons excitedly, as if they wanted to see the world burn. Before the situation worsened, Professor Shi-Erfu, who had just finished his dinner, slowly walked past them. Instantly, there was complete silence. Then, someone shouted, and the students suddenly realized that a new round of the competition was about to begin. They hurriedly returned to the open-air arena. At 7 o'clock in the evening, the new round of the competition officially began. Unlike the students fighting in the academy, the audience in the various arenas were more fans of the solo celebrity contestants. As long as the contestants they supported performed well, they would be very excited. And after the excitement, of course, they would have to spend money. If they were sad, they also needed to spend money to vent. Thus, a large number of delicacies, souvenirs, and model Easter eggs appeared in the arenas. Especially model Easter eggs. After 2 months of high sales, the popularity of the model Easter egg has not decreased but increased. Every duel competition is an advertising campaign for the model Easter egg. The audience and fans once fell into a frenzy in order to open their favorite magic genie. And after opening an ordinary model, they would want to open a magic genie model that could move, so they continued to spend money. In an era where wealth was still concentrated in a small group of people, the wealth of aristocrats and big families was immeasurable. Once they spent money, it was like a golden river. The personal trading market derived from this model Easter egg unexpectedly pulled the flow of the economy. As the market value of rare models increased, some people even treated it as an opportunity like a lottery that could explode overnight. Naturally, gamblers were not uncommon, but this was also an unavoidable phenomenon in similar industries. Just like behind the duel economy, there were countless spinach industries hidden behind it. No matter what, it could not be banned. The stars were unusually bright tonight, and the Shungmalian duel arena was brightly lit. Compared to the duels between students of the same grade, the year-skipping challenge was more exciting and full of anticipation. And the deep night was also more emotional. Whether it was the students or the audience, they were all controlled by the continuously rising emotions, adding to the excitement of the duel. But in fact, for the contestants, the year-skipping challenge was a very cautious thing. Not only would a year-skipping challenge be wasted, but it was also very likely that they would fail miserably due to the gap between their grades. Too tragic a defeat would cause the popularity of the celebrity contestants to plummet, so people who cared more about this needed to be cautious. And what we usually said about the year-skipping challenge was actually a low-level powerhouse challenging an ordinary person of a higher level. But the contestants present were all outstanding people of the same grade, so in theory, they could not be measured by their current grade. Therefore, it was very difficult to succeed in the year-skipping challenge. Even if people had some confidence, they needed to carefully measure how many grades they were skipping. The first to apply for the year-skipping challenge was impressively Winnie Scardy, a third-year student of the Magic Academy. This rising duel rookie was originally quite popular because of her intellectual temperament and beautiful appearance. Her strength was also perfectly displayed during the daytime duel competition. And what really made her stand out was actually the Halloween ball. The eldest princess Elisha chose her as her dance partner out of everyone, and at that time, all the major newspapers had in-depth reports on her. It was also from then on that Winnie Scardy truly entered the eyes of the public. And tonight, the first to apply for the challenge, Winnie Scardy, entered a strong state of no books in hand, and directly challenged a fourth-year student of the Knight Institute who had performed well during the daytime. The Knight Institute had defeated the Magic Academy in the daytime duel with a score of 3-2. But that fourth-year student had suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of Panduola. Although it didn't affect his brilliant performance after that, he still couldn't let go of that crushing defeat. Now that he was suddenly chosen by a third-year student of the Magic Academy to challenge someone of a higher grade, he couldn't help but feel that the Magic Academy was treating him as a pushover. Because of this, the fourth-year student's anger was ignited, and he stepped onto the stage with the mentality of teaching a good lesson to the younger generation. On the other side of the contestant platform, Winnie Scardy was extremely calm. Her beautiful face was illuminated by the starlight and dazzling. After both sides stepped onto the stage at the same time, they decided to quickly enter the preparation stage, and then cut into the battle stage. Winnie Scardy faced the fourth-year student, still maintaining a strong stance that was completely inconsistent with her usual temperament. From the start, she had suppressed the fourth-year student. It was almost the exact same rhythm that Panduola had used to defeat the fourth-year student, cleanly defeating him. The fourth-year student of the Knight Institute still had an expression of disbelief when the magic conducting ball completely returned to zero. The cheers from the audience because of the success of this first-year challenge were like a tsunami that constantly rushed into his ears, causing him to suffer a huge blow. Before this duel, he had been thinking about which fifth-year student to choose to challenge someone of a higher grade. That spirit had been directly beaten out of him. And after Winnie Scardy, another fourth-year student of the Magic Academy, Panduola Doragon, also chose a fifth-year student of the Noble Academy with a strong stance. The fifth-year student who had helped the Noble Academy turn the situation around in the duel between the Noble Academy and the Magic Academy, did not dare to underestimate the extremely famous Silver Dragon Lady. The duel unfolded amidst wave after wave of cheers. The speed and fierceness of the opening of both sides exceeded the understanding of the first-year students. The intensity of the duel was not inferior to any of the battles between the sixth-year students during the day. The slender white dragon that was so beautiful that it seemed to be able to break through reproductive barriers appeared once again, causing the white dragon fanatics to cheer with all their might. A huge banner depicting the white dragon's full appearance fluttered in the wind. The uniform slogan of Silver Dragon Lady at this time did not make people feel embarrassed at all. The entire huge audience seemed to be occupied by the fans of the Silver Dragon Lady. And in the midst of the fiery cheers, the Silver Dragon Lady did not disappoint and suppressed her opponent with an awe-inspiring posture. 2-in-1-4/100+. Chapter 448. The consecutive victories of Winnie Scardy and Panduola Doragon caused the atmosphere to explode. After that, the School of Magic's score jumped from 80,000 to 120,000 in an instant, taking the lead. If the other schools didn't win 3 times, it would be impossible for them to surpass the School of Magic. Thus, the pressure came to them in an instant. The fifth-year students of the Noble House, who had just been defeated by Panduola, took a deep breath and began to replenish their magic cards, preparing to challenge the sixth-year students. Although it sounded a little overconfident to challenge the sixth-year students after just losing to the fourth-year students. But if they didn't try, how would they know their limits? Progress through failure. Growth through duels. Even the fifth-year students were the same. Remember the URL. VIP, can't you? 6. The Noble House, the Night House, and the Fool House all took action after that. Instead, the School of Magic ceased all activities. But the difficulty of challenging someone of a higher grade was vividly displayed. Wanting to surpass at least one grade and defeat an equally outstanding expert wasn't something that could be done just by saying so. After that, the challenges failed one after another. Only the fourth-year students of the Noble House won against the fifth-year students of the Fool House with difficulty. The fifth-year students of the Noble House, who had regained their spirits, were defeated again in the process of challenging the sixth-year students. After that, the second-year and third-year students of the Noble House were forced to take the field, but none of them succeeded. The situation of the other schools was more or less the same. The only school that was in a better situation was the Night House. They also won 2 challenges of a higher grade. But because of a difference of 1 point, they still lost to the School of Magic. It seemed that the School of Magic was sitting firmly in the fishing boat. The School of Magic, which had already led by nearly 100,000 points, would lead by a full 200,000 points after winning this duel. That was almost impossible to surpass based on the actual difference in credits between the schools and the final results. This also meant that the School of Magic was almost certain to win the school championship. After gradually realizing this fact, the atmosphere outside of the Mage Institute became especially gloomy. Gradually, only the students of the School of Magic were left in the ring, laughing and chatting. Once the captains of the 4 academies had submitted their applications to end the challenge, the host, Judy, once again stepped onto the stage to announce the end of the competition and the final victory of the Mage School. For the audience from all over the world, this trip was definitely worth it. But for the students, a purely exciting duel wasn't enough to satisfy everyone. When Doran was certain that there was no hope in the aristocratic compound, he suddenly twisted the end of the magic firework and angrily wanted to release the firework to vent his emotions. In the end, there was only a poof sound, and it was a dud. Dake quickly held back his laughter. Although he didn't really care about the outcome of the aristocratic academy, he knew that it was better not to laugh at this time. Furthermore, the defeat of the House of Nobles meant the loss of the Holy Grail, which was indeed not a good thing. However, as a pure spectator, today was also a feast for the eyes. With the completion of the final award ceremony, the school championship competition officially came to an end. The 5 students on the stage all had confident smiles on their faces as they raised their fists towards the sky. This year, The mage school had finally overthrown the rule of the aristocratic compound and ushered in a brighter future for them. Just like the ancient aristocratic system will eventually be overthrown, only the masters of knowledge should sit upright in the sky. In the corner of the audience, a kind-looking old man wearing a monocle lowered his eyes and slowly drew a symbol along the trajectory of a fur on his chest. Then he slowly retreated into the crowd and disappeared. Tonight, the starry sky was as bright as ever, as if a god was overlooking the world. Dake Dimming walked in the crowd. Next to him were two young girls who didn't know what it was like to be worried. Doran and Pitten complained nearby. Even though the competition had already ended, they still couldn't let go of the night school's elimination. And the people who walked past them laughing were undoubtedly students of the mage school. As the saying goes, every dog has its day. Today, the mage school will definitely win the school championship competition. The students of the mage school couldn't help but fantasize about what they should wish for the Holy Grail. When the students of the other academies heard this, they couldn't help but reveal sour expressions. Why was happiness always someone else's? Time flowed like a river of sand, and only a few years went by. When Saturday's duel ended, the last bit of happiness followed closely behind. Whether it was the juniors or seniors, they all quickly threw themselves into their final revision. There was only one day left until the exams on Monday. Even if they only wanted peace of mind, they still had to pretend to study. In the blink of an eye, it was Monday, and the 3 days of final exams had finally arrived. There were a total of 6 first-year written exams this year, in order: Summoning, Potionology, Introduction to Magic, Arithmetic, Duels and Magical Beasts. Each exam lasted for 2 hours, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. After the exams, there would be about 2 days of school time, and they could only leave after the results were out. This morning, Dake Dimming woke up in a furry blanket. This was a treatment he couldn't have wished for in the winter, but it carried a trace of dryness in the hot summer. He took a light breath, then picked up the furry ball lying on his chest and put it to the side, before getting out of bed to wash up. When his mind was clear, he drank the apple juice that Fairy Ibu gave him, and took out the breakfast brought by the little devil from the basket one by one. This morning's breakfast was unusually sumptuous. He consciously controlled his appetite, and made up for the nutrition he needed today. Then, even in the face of exams, he didn't throw it away. He took out the Great Sage Daily and opened it. With one look, he spat out that mouthful of apple juice. On the headline of the Great Sage Daily News, there were the following words: "Shocking! The undying Demon King will be executed." The picture attached to the banner was an old man in bishop's clothing. The old man had small round glasses on the bridge of his nose, and he looked like an old pedant. And where the old man's eyes were pointing, there was a thick black fog sealed, and a pair of blood-red eyes faintly lit in the black fog. Looking down, the report clearly stated the old man's identity. He was a scholar of the Holy Church, and before entering the church, he was called the Sage of Suffering. Dake's attention was almost immediately attracted by this report. He put down the teacup in his hand and carefully read it. After a moment, he raised his head, and his eyes flashed. Puffed! The little devil stuck close to his face and read the newspaper with him, but he couldn't help but laugh. Dake asked, "Is it funny? The little devil is so happy." The little devil smiled evilly. He dares to call himself the Demon King? Dake was stunned. He didn't expect the little devil's sensitive point to be here. He couldn't help but shake his head and think. This report wasn't an official statement from the Holy Church, but from an outsider's perspective. Of course, whether or not this person was really an outsider was another matter altogether. The article mainly talked about a scholar of the Holy Church named Abel Yerkes, who had researched a way to completely kill the Demon King after more than 10 years. The Demon King is not dead. This wasn't actually a secret. Because the Demon King was called the Undying Demon King, there was a legend that he couldn't be killed no matter what. And in the story of the hero's sacrifice, the Demon King's ending was also to be sealed, not killed. Although the people didn't know the true mystery of the Demon King's immortality, they firmly believed in the Demon King's immortality. Now that Abel Yerkes suddenly jumped out and said that he found a way to completely kill the Demon King, how could it not cause shock? The moment this report was published, It would probably be reprinted by other newspapers. The outside world might have already begun to stir up waves because of this. Rational people would find a way to find out the truth. Those who believed blindly would spread the news crazily in shock. If this report was true, then the execution mentioned in the headline would become a reality. Of course, the premise was that the Demon King was still sealed in the Holy Church's secret place. After thinking carefully for a moment, Dake said, "Maybe it's a smoke bomb." No matter how he thought about it, he didn't think the report was true. If the method to kill the Demon King was so easy to research, the Demon King in the original game wouldn't have lived until the later stages. Therefore, it was more likely to be a smoke bomb used to deal with the Demon King escaping the seal. But what good would it do for the Holy Church to release this smoke bomb? Or maybe it wasn't released by the Holy Church, but by some other force? But what force would dare to release such a statement in front of the Holy Church? Even if someone dared to release it, would the great sage Daly dare to accept it? Thousands of questions flashed through Dake's mind in an instant. But he didn't keep thinking about it, because there was an exam coming up. When he went out, he temporarily put aside his thoughts about the report and agreed to meet up with Deanna and Luosi in the common room. And then they went to the classroom together. There were quite a lot of people who had the same idea as them. When Dake sat down in the common room, he found that there were more and more people around him. After a while, he saw Deanna hurriedly walk out of the staircase. She was still holding the summoning textbook in her hand, and she was mumbling something. Obviously, she was doing a last-minute study. Beside her, although Luosi was also holding a textbook, he was relatively relaxed. There was a gap in the ability of the two to study theory from the beginning. Deanna belonged to the type of person who had opened 6 out of 7 acupoints, and it was extremely difficult for her to memorize textbooks. Luosi, on the other hand, was both beautiful and intelligent. He had an excellent memory, but he lacked the desire for knowledge, and was not motivated. If she didn't meet Deanna, she probably wouldn't be too serious in her studies in order to help Deanna solve problems when she couldn't solve them. Now that the two complemented each other, their learning standards were actually not bad. It was just that Deanna had higher expectations of herself, so she was a little nervous. Dake interjected and eased her mood by saying a few words, and she gradually relaxed. Then the three of them walked together, and soon arrived at the summoning classroom. On the podium, Professor Shi-Erfu was already waiting in advance. There was a thick stack of test papers in her hand, and the atmosphere was more serious than usual. The students below the stage who had entered the classroom were all silent. Those who brought textbooks or review materials were silently flipping through them. "It's that smell." Dake sat in the back row by the window, but his mind was filled with memories. The few first-year professors didn't have the habit of conducting tests. Even at the end of the last semester, there were only big projects and no exams. He almost forgot how it felt to enter the exam room. 10 minutes past 8 in the morning, Professor Shi-Erfu saw that all the students had arrived. She said a few words and then handed out the test papers, but prohibited the students from writing. The exam officially began when the bell rang at 8 o'clock. Dake quickly skimmed through the questions from the beginning to the end, and had a preliminary understanding of the length of the test paper. Then he began to answer the questions from the beginning. The exam time was from 8 to 10 o'clock, which was a full 120 minutes. However, the length of the test paper was much shorter than Dake expected. This might be because this world didn't have the 3-year mock 5-year college entrance exam, nor did it have the habit of taking exams frequently. Therefore, the students lacked exam experience and their answering speed was limited. Therefore, the professors wrote the test papers based on the speed of most people. However, this was not enough for Dake Dimung, who came from an exam-oriented education. In just half an hour, he finished answering all the questions. In order to get a high score, he began to carefully check his answers. In fact, when he took exams in his previous life, he didn't have the habit of checking his answers. However, he was no longer the same person he was in the past. After he was born in this world and his memories were awakened, his willpower was honed. This was reflected in the fact that he had more patience during the exam. After checking his answers 3 times and correcting one of the careless mistakes, Dake put down his pen and looked at Professor Shi-Erfu on the podium. Professor Shirfu glanced at him and pointed at the blackboard. One of the things to note was clearly written on the blackboard. The exam time is less than an hour. You cannot leave the exam room early. At 9 o'clock sharp, Dake put away his pen and paper and was about to hand in his paper. However, just as he was about to sit up, he suddenly sat down again. I have no place to go after handing in my paper. I'll just wait here. Thinking like this, he turned his head and looked out the window that was as clear as glass. The thoughts in his heart gradually churned again. The extra time in the exam room was probably the quietest and most worry-free time in the world. He calmed down and carefully thought about it. The report from the great sage daily in the morning came to his mind. Judging by the logic of a normal person, there was a 90% chance that the report was deliberately published by an outsider. And the purpose of doing this couldn't be to really execute the Demon King, could it? After the exam, maybe I can discuss it with Professor Shirfu. 2 and 1 4,000 plus. I accidentally fell asleep. Give me some monthly votes and fuel. Sob sob sob. Chapter 449. After all, this was the first final exam, and very few people handed in their papers in advance. Even if they finished, they would just wait in the classroom obediently. Until the bell rang, everyone was forced to stop writing and hand in their papers one by one. At this time, one could see all kinds of people. Some were full of confidence, some were nervous, some were in a hurry to finish the last stroke, and some were secretly glancing at other people's papers. It was quite interesting. After Dake handed in his papers, he asked Deanna and Luosi to leave first. He waited until everyone else had left before he went to the podium, picked up his papers, and walked with Professor Shirfu. What's the matter, Dake? Professor Shirfu asked with a smile. Dake said, Professor, have you read today's morning paper? Professor Shirfu said as he walked, I'm a little busy today. Dake thought for a while and said, I saw a report in the Great Sage Daily, and I'm a little confused. Professor Shirfu asked, what does it have to do with? Dake said in a low voice, the Devil King. Professor Shirfu's heart skipped a beat and he said, let's talk in the office. Not long after, Dake arrived at Professor Shirfu's office. He put the papers on the desk and turned around, but Professor Shirfu had already locked the door. Wait a minute. Professor Shirfu walked to the guest table and picked up a roll of newspaper. She actually subscribed to the newspaper, but she didn't have time to read it. Dake saw her sit down on the sofa and naturally made tea. Professor Shirfu looked at the newspaper and frowned from time to time, deep in thought. When Dake finished making tea, she had almost finished reading the article. She couldn't help but look up and say, 2 months have passed. Dake, Professor Shirfu said. It's been almost 2 months since the Devil King escaped from the seal and reincarnated. The saint has finally started to take action. Dake came to a realization. So the Holy Church is the one behind this? Did they not do anything in the past 2 months? Professor Shirfu put down the newspaper and said seriously, that's impossible, but I think it's a secret operation. Since they had chosen this method, it was likely that they had not found the Demon King's reincarnation vessel. Or perhaps they had let it escape after finding it. That was why he thought of some tricks to reduce the consequences. Why do you think they would fabricate such a story? Dake frowned and said, Professor, this is not easy to think of. Professor Sylph said, you can think about it from their point of view. Dark deliberated and said, if it was my holy church, first of all, we wouldn't know how the Demon King and the seal committed suicide to escape. Therefore, after discovering it, we would first entangle ourselves with this problem and begin to look for external or internal factors. I don't think they can find any external factors. Professor Shirfu nodded slightly. That's right, Dake said. Then they might need to clean up the inside, which would waste some of their time. Of course, the most important thing is to find the Demon King's reincarnation vessel. During this process, we can be sure that some divination methods will be used. But since the Demon King has always been called immortal, he must have a way to deal with divination methods. Perhaps his reincarnation is special and untraceable. Professor Shirfu said, that's true. If it's easy to find the Demon King's reincarnation vessel, even if there are thousands of vessels, even if it takes 10 or 20 years, the saint will definitely eliminate all of them. After confirming this, Dake said, if they can't find the Demon King's reincarnation vessel, they must think of ways to deal with subsequent problems. For example, if the Demon King suddenly appears, it will have an impact on the saint, or it will have an impact on the saint. They need to maintain stability. Professor Sylph couldn't help but nod. Maintaining stability is a good word. The saint is different from us. They don't know that the Demon King's reincarnation will have an impact on the soul consciousness, so they will use the Demon King at his peak as an enemy. Dake asked curiously, how strong is the Demon King at his peak? Well, Professor Sylph took a sip of tea and said slowly, it's about the same level as I am now. Dake couldn't help but frown. Although he didn't know how strong Professor Shi Erfu was, since she was the vice dean of the Shengmalian Academy, even if she couldn't compare to the headmaster of Erdii, she should still be one of the strongest people in the world. 10 years of rapid development of magical engineering was enough for an already powerful magus to be reborn. And the Demon King, who had 10 years of slack, was still comparable to the current Professor Shi Erfu. How strong was it back then? No wonder Brett the Brave sacrificed himself in the battle against the Demon King. Dake took a deep breath and said, but since he no longer has the dominating power of the past, why should we fear him? Professor Shi Erfu shook his head. Perhaps it's because the existence of the Demon King itself is a kind of belief. The remnants of the demon race and those crazy heretics scattered all over the world can easily gather around him and form a very considerable force. Or perhaps it's because the Demon King has the technology to multiply the demon race and can revive the demon race. Also, Professor Shi Erfu looked up at him and said, although the magical engineering technology of the past supported us in our victory against the demon race, it didn't actually form a system, nor was it greatly simplified. But now, not only has the magical engineering technology been greatly improved in depth, it has also formed a system and a systematic learning method. It's not difficult for people with enough talent, especially those with a deep foundation in magic, to learn it. Dake couldn't help but ask, just like Vlad? Professor Shi Erfu nodded. Just like Vlad. Dake thought for a moment and said, this is indeed a problem. The Holy Church believes that the Demon King will become a great threat, and if the situation really gets worse, they will become the sinners of history because they let the Demon King escape from the seal. So whether it's to maintain stability or to protect themselves, they need to remove themselves from this vortex. I think I understand now. Professor Shi Erfu's expression changed slightly. What do you understand? Dake said excitedly. The Holy Church of today undoubtedly has one of the most powerful voices in the world. In the eyes of ordinary people, their words are authoritative. If one day they suddenly announce to the public that the Demon King has been completely killed, there will be people who won't believe it, but there won't be too many people who won't believe it. And as long as they establish the fact that the Demon King is dead before the Demon King announces his return, they will completely kill him in public opinion. In other words, even if the Demon King reappears, as long as no one believes it, it won't be the Demon King, and it won't cause a worldwide panic. As long as the Holy Church deals with it quickly enough, the returning Demon King can be the remnants of the demon race in disguise, or it can be the heretic church in disguise. Everything depends on the Holy Church itself. If you control the mouthpiece of the people, you control the truth of the world. And this report is the first step to create momentum. Shi Erfu's lips parted in surprise. She had thought of this, but she didn't expect Dake's opinion to be more detailed than she thought. If the Holy Church was really acting like Dake said, then they were undoubtedly concocting a lie for the whole world. Between admitting defeat and deceiving the world, they chose to deceive the world. Once they succeeded, it would be wonderful. But this seemingly wonderful plan actually bore a greater risk than admitting defeat. If the Demon King gained power, and this matter was exposed, the Holy Church would be consigned to eternal damnation. Who came up with this plan? Professor Shi Erfu couldn't help but think. Was there such a crazy person in the Holy Church? Weren't they afraid that other forces would get hold of the evidence of their deceit and overthrow them? But then again, if it was the royal family who had the evidence, they would probably just keep quiet. And from the standpoint of the Shung Malian Academy, they wouldn't say much either. Because the royal family and the Holy Church weren't actually opposing each other, they even infiltrated each other. They were both pillars of the Holy Church's stability. Overthrowing the Holy Church wouldn't benefit the royal family, the academy, or the people. Maybe it would be different in another era. But this was the case in this era. Humans couldn't afford internal wars in a short period of time. 10 years of recovery was far too short. The same was true for other subhumans. So the Shung Malian Academy, which had always been neutral, made an exception to show a tendency to support the Dove faction. Just as she was thinking about this, Dake had already stood up and said, "Professor, I'll go back first." Professor Shi-Erfa nodded and didn't ask him to stay. "I should also mark the papers." So Dake left the office. He and Professor Shi-Erfu had different perspectives, because he didn't think that the Devil King would pose too much of a threat, and he didn't care much about the Holy Church itself, so he didn't think too deeply. This matter made him suddenly realize that the world was moving towards informatization. What the Holy Church was playing, or perhaps playing, was nothing more than the manipulation of public opinion. With the promotion of basic education and the development of the era, the dissemination of information through media like newspapers would become more and more important. But what was really hidden behind the scenes was the symbol of informatization. Computers, which had already appeared. The Shung Malian Academy's branch card and the access card in Dake's hands all had part of the functions of a computer, and it was even more convenient than the original computers by many times. It was just that for a long time, no one had focused on this and further developed the technology of the branch card. Moreover, the information dissemination of the branch card was based on the Academy's barrier, so it lacked generalization. But everything always started from the simplest, and with a foundation, there was the possibility of development. All the flaws and inadequacies could be solved by finding a way to solve them. If this technology could be developed and controlled, it was equivalent to controlling the information dissemination of the new era, or even the entire era. Although this was the case, Dake was only thinking about it. Right now, he didn't have the time and interest to be the Johann von Neumann of this world. There was still a potioneering exam in the afternoon. As for the Holy Church, as for the Devil King, sit and watch him go crazy, sit and watch him collapse. Wouldn't that be great? 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. When the last magical beast exam ended, most of the students seemed to have been freed from purgatory, and they couldn't wait to howl at the sky like wolves. Among the 6 exams completed in these 3 days, the most difficult one was still arithmetic. This could more or less be seen from the deathly pale faces of the students who walked out of the examination hall that day. The only thing that made them feel gratified was that on that night, the first-year students suddenly discovered that the second-year seniors were also suffering the same pain. Humans were always good at seeking a moment of peace by sharing pain. In the second-year arithmetic class, Professor Bacon not only used the teaching materials compiled by Dake, but also used the original second-year teaching materials for further processing, making this batch's arithmetic class unprecedentedly difficult. After Dake found out, he couldn't help but feel lucky that the teaching materials were written as unknown in many places. Otherwise, if the second-year seniors knew that the devil was right in front of them, wouldn't they drown him? Compared to the high difficulty of the arithmetic exam, there was a surprisingly easy exam among the 6 subjects. The Magical Beasts test papers written by Professor Nini herself were all very basic. Anyone who listened carefully in class would be able to answer them. However, Magical Beast was originally an interest class in the first year, just like astronomy, and there was no need to increase the difficulty level. In short, the students who walked out of the classroom for the Magical Beast exam were obviously much more relaxed. After finishing all the exams, the first-year students didn't even have time to return to the dormitory to put down their backpacks and other things. Instead, they swarmed into the especially open Travelers Street in groups of 3 to 5 to celebrate the upcoming 3-month-long holiday. Dake didn't want to go at first, but he had no choice but to follow under the tutelage of Doran and Pitan. Deanna and Luosi naturally followed as well. Both of them were in a good mood. However, the first-year students were still rather inexperienced, and they were dismissed after a meal. There were no other activities. Most of them only strolled around Travelers Street before returning to the common lounge of the aristocrat compound to chat and play chess, having a lot of fun. Following this, they had at least 2 extra days to stay in school. They could only leave school after the professors finished grading the exam papers and distributed the results. In addition, the professors would distribute different grades of summer homework according to each student's score. On Friday night, there would be an end-of-term party and a graduation ceremony. The school championship competition and the Holy Grail wishing event would also be held at the same time. Whenever they thought of the school championship competition, the students from the other 3 academies would feel a dull ache in their chests and taste a lemon in their mouths. It was almost 9 o'clock in the evening when Dake finally got rid of Doran and the others and returned to the dormitory. He lay down on his bed and looked at the ceiling, lost in thought. 1 school year and it's over. That's really bad. But before he could have a good rest, there was a knock on the door. He couldn't help but frown. 2 in 1 4,000 plus. Chapter 450. On the last night of May, Dake had originally planned on emptying his mind and not thinking about anything, leaving everything for tomorrow. But it seemed like someone didn't want him to have a good rest. He straightened up from the bed and lazily glanced at the magic guide fairies in the bedroom. Fairy Ibu, who had been quietly watching him, immediately stood up and walked towards the door with its head held high. As its master's most intimate little jacket, it obviously knew what it should do at this time. But after opening the door with its ribbon tentacles, it couldn't help but let out an unhappy cry. "Hey!" Deanna, who had appeared at the door, greeted it. Luosi, who had walked out from behind Deanna, bent down and tried to pick up this cute magic guide fairy. However, Evie immediately took a few steps back and glared at Rose vigilantly. Then he ran back into the room with loud thumps. Seeing Fairy Ibu run away, Luosi couldn't help but reveal a trace of disappointment. Deanna still asked casually, "Dake, can we come in?" "Come in." Dake yawned and relaxed again. After Deanna and Luosi closed the door and walked in, Fairy Ibu, with a face full of complaints, used its ribbon tentacles to take out 2 cups from the cabinet, poured apple juice and pear juice into them, and then brought them to the table. "Thank you." Luosi politely thanked it and, as usual, chose the pear juice that could remove acne and nourish one's skin. Deanna, on the other hand, took a sip of the apple juice and let out a big sigh. "What's wrong?" Dake, who was sitting by the bed, asked casually. Deanna secretly glanced at him and said, "We have to go home in 2 days." Dake laughed. "Don't you always say you miss home?" "I do." Deanna pouted. "But when I go home, there's no one to play with me." Dake asked curiously. "I remember that the Giant Bear clan has a very prosperous population, right?" Deanna pouted even harder. "But whenever they meet, they will either arm wrestle or fence. I just want to go shopping, have some snacks and buy a doll." Dake rolled his eyes and thought about it. He had a feeling that the people from that family might really be capable of doing such a thing. But shopping, eating snacks and buying dolls? Heh, women. "Then let's go play with Luosi," Dake said. "Viscount Flotty's mansion is also in the royal capital, right?" Deanna added. "But Luosi said that she will be grounded when she goes home." Dake glanced at Luosi and recalled her words. He shook his head helplessly. "It's not like Viscount Flotty's manor can stop you." Deanna's eyes lit up. She nodded and said happily, "Yes. If he doesn't open the door, I'll tear it down." Luosi was both angry and amused. She quickly said, "Please don't. That will cause trouble for my uncle." Deanna squinted. "Of course not. I'm just kidding." But Luosi already had a vague feeling that something bad was going to happen. Dake watched the interaction between the two. He thought for a while and said, "If you need, you can come to the Duke's manor to find me. I usually don't go out." It's best if you let me know in advance. I'll have someone prepare some desserts." Speaking of desserts, I'm not sleepy anymore. Deanna rolled her eyes. She was obviously excited. How could Dark not know that their purpose for coming here tonight was to say such a thing? Not to mention Luosi's family problems, Deanna would probably not be able to go out as she pleased after she went home. But if their destination was the Duke's manor, no parents would stop them. But it seemed that there was nothing at home to entertain them. We'll see. Dake shook his head. That was not his mission. Then the three of them chatted for a while. From time to time, Deanna and Lucy glanced at the vampire's daughter, who was shaking her head and muttering words. Even though they had met the vampire's daughter several times when they came here earlier, they still seemed to care a lot about her. Dake thought that it was because the vampire's daughter was too cute. After half an hour, she pretended to be sleepy. Deanna was still chattering. Dorm 201 became quiet again after Lucy dragged her away. Can we sleep peacefully now? Dake looked at the time. It was already past 10 o'clock. So he prepared his pajamas and took a nice bath. But during the bath, there was a knock on the door again. Who was it this time? Dake had to take a bath as soon as possible. He put on his pajamas and walked out of the bathroom. He saw Eudora sitting timidly at the table, holding the hot milk with two small hands and sipping it. Dake couldn't help rubbing his eyebrows and took the initiative to say, "Good evening, Eudora." "Good evening." Eudora's tone immediately rose. "Sorry to disturb you." "It's okay," Dake said as he wiped the dew on his hair with a towel. "Why are you looking for me so late at night?" Eudora whispered, "I saw Deanna and the others. So you have been guarding when you saw them come in. After they left, you came here?" Dake couldn't help rubbing his eyebrows and asked, "How was the exam?" Eudora pursed her lips and her eyes were a little dim. "Not very good." Dake subconsciously comforted her. "It's okay. The exam is actually a process of testing yourself. Make up for where you lack. But this long vacation is 3 months. Don't be idle." Eudora nodded vigorously and said, "After the vacation, I will go to the Star Tower to study with Professor Midya. I will not embarrass myself again next semester." "How are you embarrassed?" Dake said helplessly. "By the way, will Professor Midya continue to work next semester?" Eudora thought for a while and said, "Probably. She seems to be preparing to open a course specializing in astrology or divination." "That's good." Dake glanced at little Ivan, who had been secretly glancing over, and smiled. "In this case, my Ivan can continue to study astrology." Eudora looked at Ivan, who was obviously excited and couldn't help but say, "So cute." Dark waved his hand, and Ibuchan ran over eagerly. He hugged little Ivan on his body, sat down by the bed, and chatted with Eudora casually. Eudora didn't pester him too much, and left after 10 minutes. The two said goodnight to each other, and left through the door. Dake returned to the bedroom and dried his hair, thinking that he could finally lie on the bed and read comfortably for a while. But he didn't expect that not long after he lay down, the vampire's daughter stuck to him. He couldn't help but show a helpless smile. He touched her little head dotingly, then picked up the storybook and told her a story. Once upon a time, there was a temple in the mountain. The night was gentle, caressing his cheeks. The magic elf slowly gathered around the bed and listened to him tell the story of the past. When the morning light kissed the earth again, it was already June. Dake Deming woke up from his sleep and immediately searched for news related to the Holy Church in the morning newspaper. But these days, the newspaper was only talking about the Holy Church scholar, Abel Yerkes. It made people feel that there seemed to be controversy within the Holy Church about this crazy decision, so the implementation was not very smooth. Of course, it was not as simple as it looked on the surface. After Dake put down the newspaper, he opened the curtains and looked outside, feeling a little excited. After all, he was about to go home for the holidays, so of course he would be happy. However, after breathing in some of the morning air, he sat down again and began today's topic. After only 2 hours, he wrote a simple test paper, then handed this test paper to Magic Guide Secretary to scan and show it one by one. Immediately afterward, the magic elf sat upright in their seats, copied the questions of the test paper one by one, and then began to answer them. In view of the difficulty and writing speed of some magic elf, Dake gave them plenty of time to answer the questions to ensure that each magic elf could finish the questions. Then he first marked the Dilu Beast test paper. After confirming that this was a perfect answer, he gave it an answer, and let it be responsible for marking the homework of other magic elf. After that, he gave the top 3 rich little red flowers as rewards according to the score, further arousing the magic elf's enthusiasm to learn. In this way, the exam for the magic elf was over. What was unexpected was that the top 3 were the Dilu beast, Fairy Evie, and Evie. Dake originally thought that the little fiend beast would be in the top, but he didn't expect that Fairy Evie would catch up and be second only to the Dilu beast. And Ibuchan's hard work all this time also paid off, being in 3rd place. As for the lion beast, Meow Meow, and the vampire's daughter, in the end, they fell behind in terms of learning time, and couldn't compare to the intelligent Dilu beast and Fairy Evie who were born early. Dake finally posted the results on the wall, and left the dormitory. As soon as he left, the dormitory immediately became noisy. The Dilu beast who got 1st place was sitting in its usual place, reading a book as if it was natural. The 2nd place Fairy Evie was walking back and forth in the bedroom with its head held high, and its chest puffed out. It even stuck a little red flower in its ear, calling out me the whole time, very proud of itself. And the 3rd place little Evie, after seeing this for a while, also quietly followed behind Fairy Evie, walking model steps, secretly happy. Seeing these 2 Evies so proud of themselves, the 6th place little fiend beast could only stare with a face full of anger, almost causing internal injuries. But who could be blamed for this? The infighting between the magic elf's open and covert didn't affect Dake's progress. In these last 2 days, he needed to buy all the basic materials he needed for the 3 months of vacation. Shengmalian Academy's control over the students was a lot looser. Most of the things could be taken out of the school. Apart from this, he also needed to buy the 3 months of cat juice, and the magic potion to raise the insect tree, as well as the boxes to pack all kinds of things. In short, he needed to buy a lot of things. After buying everything, he still needed to spend a lot of time to pack everything up. The academy had set a time limit of 2 days for students to stay in the academy for this reason. This was because the little magisters needed to pack too much luggage. Walking on the streets of Traveler's Street, Dake found that there were a lot of people buying luggage. Moreover, there was a special kind of luggage that was selling like hotcakes. This was a special kind of luggage called fluid luggage. After the luggage was closed, it would slowly be filled with a magical fluid, causing the items placed inside to be fixed in place by the fluid. When moved, it wouldn't shake. Moreover, there was a cushioning device around it, which could be used to store fragile experimental items. In addition, there were a lot of basic experimental materials. The students only needed to buy materials of the corresponding grade, which was very convenient. Although the summer vacation homework hadn't been given out yet, there would definitely be a lot of experimental homework. Dake waited until 8 in the evening before returning to the dormitory with a lot of things. He had used up a lot of energy. Afterwards, he began to pack his luggage, putting all kinds of things into the luggage according to their categories. The magic elves also followed suit and organized their own little things. At 10 o'clock, the dormitory gradually had a few more large luggage filled to the brim. Dake took a light breath, washed up, and began to absorb a new round of great sins. In May he only made 1, Young Blue-Eyed Dragon, and 2 Bliss 3 month. After that he stored up the pride and greed that he absorbed. Now the pride and greed stored in the worm tree were 6. 5 points each. The changes in the Great Sins index were also relatively limited. System, expand the index. He casually called out the list and compared it to May. Pride, 9592. Envy, 3938. Rage, 8280. Sloth, 6970. Greed, 9593. Gluttony, 7375. Bliss, 8082. Originally, after drawing 15 points last month, Pride and Greed were only left with 90 points. However, after a slight increase, they reached their current level. Pride is at 92 points, Greed is at 93 points. Only these 2 meet the requirements, so I'll start with Pride. Dake rubbed his forehead. If he wanted to break through Great Sins 3 and make Great Sins X, 30 points of Great Sins was the first requirement. He had to try once every 3 months during the summer break. He had done the most research on Pride, so if possible he would prioritize Pride. In short, he spent some time calming himself down before using Soul Loss Curse and underworld spirit spell to carefully extract 5 points of pride. With this, pride's reserve reached 8 points. However, if he wanted to continue accumulating pride, he had to let pride grow a little. I have to think of a way. Dark focused his mind and began to think carefully. There were only 2 days left until the summer break. Most of the first years were packing their bags. Most of them were away from their parents for the first time for almost a year. They more or less missed their parents and couldn't wait to go home. Of course, there was no lack of students who had achieved something in school and were eager to show what they had learned to their parents. It might be hard to imagine, but AI Ma Métis was one of them. Although the main reason why she was so diligent and eager to learn had little to do with it. As an only child who grew up in a scholarly family and was strictly educated from a young age, she had a need in this regard. However, when she thought about the results of the first year's exam, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to get first place. It suddenly rained in the dark night, but the sudden increase in water vapor didn't reduce the heat of the summer. Instead, it made people feel uncomfortable. White Gouda didn't tidy up anything. He spent all his free time playing magic chess with Luoboat, as if he wanted to finish his share for the next 3 months. Luoboat had been playing chess with him since morning. Finally, he couldn't help but say, "White, there's something wrong with you." White paused and said, "What problem can I have?" Luoboat listened to him and said, "What are you hiding from me? Is it about the summer vacation?" White smiled bitterly and didn't continue to hide it. "You saw through me. I wanted to stay in school with my mother, but Professor Earbook said I had to go home." Luoboat raised his eyebrows and said, "I heard you say that your home is in," White said, "Angora Welfare Home. Madam Natasha and Sister Chris, who took care of me when I was growing up, and my brothers and sisters who didn't like to play with me." Luoboat was curious. "Why didn't they play with you?" White thought for a moment and said, "Maybe it's because Madam Natasha and Sister Chris are too good to me. Come to think of it, in their eyes, I'm probably the kind of villain who takes away all the love that should belong to them." Luoboat couldn't help but open his eyes wide. "That's too strange. Shouldn't you empathize with each other?" White said, "Life in the orphanage isn't as good as you think, Luoboat. Sometimes we would fight over a piece of bread, but of course, I always got the biggest piece." Luoboat said, "I think it's because the people in the orphanage knew that you were the child of the hero from the beginning." White nodded. "It seems so now." Luoboat comforted him again. "Actually, it's not bad to go back. After all, they're like your family, aren't they? And they did it so that Aunt Brad wouldn't be exposed in the academy. Although I don't know exactly what happened that day. She seems to have done something bad." White shook his head. "I don't know either. They don't tell me a lot of things." Luoboat said, "After all, we're still young." "That's not the point, Luoboat." White said, "It's just like how Professor Earbook always discusses things with Dake. If I knew everything like him, I wouldn't be excluded." Luoboat said helplessly, "Ah, but that's Dake." White, "Yes, that's Dake." The two continued to play magic chess. The night passed and the sky cleared up after the rain. Earlier than expected, at noon on this day, the results of the first years were posted on the notice wall outside the castle. 5000 plus. Chapter 451. Beep. The sudden vibration of the school card made Dake raise his head slightly. Since he woke up in the morning, he had not left the house. It was rare for him to leisurely read a book. He put down the book and took out the school card from the bag at the head of the bed. "Are the results out?" Dake thought to himself. It was rare for him to not be nervous when the results came out. He took the school card in front of him and injected a little magic into it. The card lit up and an email-like icon appeared in the middle. He opened the icon and a report card appeared. "Let me take a look." Name, Dake Deming. Remember the URL, MVIP can't you? VIP School, Aristocrat House, Grade, First Year, Summoning, 100, Potioneering, 995, Introduction to Magic, 985, Arithmetic, 100, History of Magic, 97, Dueling, 100, Magical Beasts, 100, Astronomy, 98, Total Score, 793, Ranking 1, He could see the practical and written test scores after clicking on the scores of each subject. Dake looked carefully and found that the points deducted from potioneering and introduction to magic were in practice. It seems that my potioneering and magic cards are not perfect. He shook his head slightly and looked at the history of magic and astronomy thesis comments. Professor Ryan Hux and Professor Mitya Bartholomew both wrote 2 or 3 lines of short comments, pointing out the problems in the thesis. However, it was beyond Dark's expectations that he could get such a high score for these 2 subjects. He was quite satisfied with this. Total score of 793, first place. That's expected. Although he was not sure if he could get first place at the beginning of the exam. But after the summoning, potioneering, and introduction to magic practical exams, he knew that his advantage was limitless. The only thing that stopped him from getting first place in the grade was the history of magic and astronomy thesis scores. But since the scores for these 2 subjects were not low, it was only natural that he would get first place. There was a surprise, but it was not big. Dake then got up, tidied his clothes, and prepared to go out. Of course, it was impossible for the professors to send all the students' grades to everyone's branch card. If he wanted to know the other students' grades, he could only look at the public grades. He quickly pushed the door open and saw that the corridor was already bustling with people. "Hey, Dake." The boy from room 202, who lived next to him, happened to be leaving his room. He greeted him and said, "How's it going? Did you get your report card yet?" "Of course." Dake smiled and said, "Looks like your results are pretty good." That person said proudly, "It's better than expected. Everyone passed." "What about you?" "Dake, all of them." "That's great." The man raised his voice and said, "I can't imagine what will happen to those who fail. Make-up exam? Tutoring? Repeat a year? Oh my God." "Dake, he won't repeat a year." Generally speaking, it's not difficult to take a make-up exam. Maybe. The man nodded. After all, they are all test sites. How about we go to the bulletin board together? I would like to. Dake shrugged and spread out his hands. But someone is already waiting for me. The man subconsciously turned around and saw the 2 golden flowers of the aristocrat house standing behind him. When he turned around, he had a flirtatious look on his face. "Then I won't disturb you." Dake smiled and walked over to meet up with Deanna and Luosi. The 3 of them walked side by side. Deanna looked a little excited, while Luosi had a quiet smile on her face. "Pretty good grades?" Dake guessed. Deanna immediately jumped up. "I was waiting for you to ask. I got into the top 10. Really? That's pretty good." Dake quickly congratulated her. "Of course." Deanna's little nose stuck up. "Look at how hard I worked." "What about Luosi?" Dake asked again. Luosi said shyly, "They all passed. I'm ranked 13th. Dake was a little surprised. "Did the introduction to magic and potions drag down your grades?" Luosi nodded. "Yes." The 3 of them walked down the stairs and arrived at the common room. A large number of first-year students had already gathered in the common room. The junior magisters were exchanging their results and rankings with each other, expressing all sorts of emotions. When Dake appeared, the whole atmosphere suddenly became quiet. Only when Doran suddenly shouted did the air return to normal. Doran jogged over and patted Dake's shoulder. He said warmly, "First?" Dake nodded. "First. First indeed." Doran immediately jumped up, as if he was the one who got first. He happily ran back to the crowd. Then he said loudly, "Although we didn't get first place in this year's school championship, we got first place in the first year. Tomorrow, the year after next, the year after next. It will all be our noble house. Do your best. Do your best." The group of boys suddenly roared, their morale soaring. Doran said again, "We can't relax after we go back for the holidays. This is our chance to catch up with the other academies. Next year's school championship will be ours." Dake Dimming acted as if nothing had happened as he walked past the group of people who had inexplicably ignited and slipped out of the common room. Before he closed the door, he faintly heard a girl's impatient voice, as if she was saying, "Hey, can you stop quarreling? You're making it sound like you're the ones who got first place. Forget it, even if they're second or third place, you can still quarrel." But the result? Doran, you're the loudest. What's your place? Say it, what's your place? Why don't you even dare to say what's your place? Trash. Sometimes I feel that the first-year nobles have a knightly spirit. After crossing the external bridge, Dake couldn't help but say. Deanna rolled her eyes and had a flash of inspiration. It's the spirit of the Knight Academy, right? Dake smiled. The noble house is brimming with self-confidence and doesn't admit defeat. The Knight Academy is courageous and impulsive. In this aspect, they are actually very similar. They both have the desire to strive for victory. So the Knight Academy and the noble house are always quarreling fiercely. Let's go to the announcement wall and see who's second and third. The three of them chatted as they walked, and soon they were out of the castle. They found the announcement wall outside the castle gate. At this time, the announcement wall was already surrounded by people, and more people were joining in. Half of them were first-year students, and the other half were senior students. Even though only the first-year students' results were posted, it was clear that the seniors were also interested in the first year's rankings. Just like the Duel Club's recruitment contest, there were club members who came to look for newcomers. The final results were also a good reference. Dake only took a glance to find the third-year Helena Tracy. This third-year senior, who had a very good relationship with AI Ma, was a member of the literature club. She was tall and valiant. Outside the crowd, a member of the aristocratic history research society, who had a slight impression of him, was also looking from afar, but it was not Owen Michael, who was in charge of the recruitment. Of course, in addition to these people who came with a purpose, there were many people who just wanted to join in the fun. Such a lively scene made Dake frown slightly. Deanna didn't care, but Luosi obviously didn't want to squeeze into the crowd. So he said, "You guys wait here, I'll squeeze in and take a look." Then he squeezed through the crowd. After a while he finally squeezed to the front of the announcement wall. A table with the ranking, name, branch, and score was neatly posted. He took out the magician's secretary, rubbed 2 fingers together, and a slightly glowing book appeared in his hand. Record it. After receiving the order, the magician's secretary scanned the result table with a single glance. Dake began to retreat. Retreating against the flow was obviously more difficult than going with the flow. When Dake left the crowd, he couldn't help but gasp for breath. Then he called the 2 of them to sit on a bench and opened the magician's secretary. "Let me see second places. It's actually not AI Ma?" Deanna leaned close, and a milky fragrance wafted into his nose. Because Dake and AI Ma were working together, they were also closer to her. But the second place wasn't AI Ma, but Sarah Savati. After all, she's the daughter of the Sage of Winter. This wasn't hard to accept. AI Ma and Sarah's score was very close, only 1 point apart. Second place Sarah, third place AI Ma, fourth place. Deanna, so you're fifth? Deanna couldn't help but snicker. Dake pretended to be surprised. "I thought you were only 10th. Deanna said proudly. "How is it? Not the top 10, but the top 5. That's amazing." Dake was not stingy with his praise. Deanna wasn't good at studying. He knew this better than anyone else. But such a stupid girl still obtained the 5th place in the entire cohort. Of course, it couldn't be attributed to the advantage of the practical class. She had been in and out of the library frequently during this period of time, and her efforts were finally not in vain. Then Dake continued to read. Eudora Veen 7th place? Didn't she say that she didn't do very well in the exam? Dake was slightly stunned. He clearly remembered Eudora's expression the night before yesterday. It obviously didn't seem fake. But how was the 7th place in the entire cohort bad? Or did I underestimate her goal? Thinking of this, Dake couldn't help but fall silent. Eudora didn't appear in the common room, nor did she come out to see the announcement. Perhaps she was with Professor Mitya now. Like Deanna, Eudora's results at the beginning of this semester were quite average. To be able to get 7th place in the cohort, one could see how hard she worked. Diligence and hard work were the only ways to get high marks after all. Let's go back. Dake waved the magic secretary in his hand and prepared to return to the dormitory. He could roughly imagine AI Ma's depression when she found out that she was only in 3rd place, and Sarah's fighting spirit after confirming that she was in second place. As their goal, Dake wanted to continue to be in the lead, so he couldn't relax. For those with resources, the final exam was only a stage summary. The summer vacation was the watershed that further widened the gap between people. Whether it was Aima or Sarah, they both had channels that could allow them to rise quickly. And the foundation built in the first years would become the foundation for their rapid improvement. In the new school year, they would probably return to the academy with a new look. However, in this aspect, I won't be bad either. It was almost evening. Whether it was the students who obtained ideal results, or the students who were notified that they had failed, they all temporarily put aside their sadness and joy and walked to the auditorium on the first floor. Tonight's banquet was held in the auditorium as usual. Because of the serious atmosphere of the banquet, most of the students were wearing uniforms and school badges, so there wasn't much of an atmosphere of entertainment. As for the dance, there was also a dance, but it was only a private dance that was arranged at the end of the banquet. Starting from 5 in the afternoon, people had already started to enter the auditorium one after another. When Dake and the other two arrived, there were already a lot of people sitting inside. Outside the main entrance of the auditorium, there was a huge 2-meter-long magic book floating quietly in the air. Dake and the other two stopped at the entrance and curiously looked at the upperclassmen who were posing in front of the magic book. Every time there was a fluctuation of magic, 2 photos would fly out of the pages of the magic book and fall into their hands. Is this a camera? Dake couldn't help but feel a strong sense of curiosity. Deanna and Luosi were also very excited. That's a simple photocopier specially made by the School of Magic. It can record a projection of about 2 seconds. The girl who appeared behind them was wearing the 3rd grade School of Fools uniform. She had a warm smile on her face. It was senior sister Angelia Hudson. The School of Magic is in charge of decorating the venue this year, so of course they have to show a little different technology. When she saw Dake and the other two turn around, she smiled and said, "What do you think? Don't you want to take a picture together?" About 2 seconds of projection? Dake glanced at Deanna and saw that she was very interested. He said, "Should we take a picture together?" Deanna immediately nodded like a chicken pecking at rice. Luosi glanced at them and stopped in his tracks. He whispered, "Why don't you two take a picture together first?" Dake nodded. "That's fine too." So he and Deanna walked to the back of the crowd and lined up. Luosi followed behind them with a smile. The control of the grimoire was very simple. There weren't many people in the line, so it wasn't long before it was their turn. Dake walked up to the grimoire and imitated the senior students. He touched the cover of the grimoire lightly. With a trace of magic power, the grimoire glowed faintly. A 10-second countdown appeared on top of the grimoire. He smiled and leaned against Deanna. Both of them were wearing the same school uniform, but there was a difference of half a head in height. One had shiny blonde hair, the other had dazzling silver hair. Dake always had the temperament of a noble. Deanna, on the other hand, only looked quiet and noble when she didn't move. The two of them stood side by side, and they looked quite compatible. When the countdown on top of the grimoire went from 10 seconds to 2, Dake whispered, "Smile." "Okay," Deanna answered obediently. Then, as the countdown went from 2 seconds to 0, she suddenly stood on her tiptoes and gave the boy beside her a quick peck on the cheek. Chirp! The grimoire glowed faintly, and 2 magic photos flew out from the pages and slowly floated down. Dake was stunned for a moment, but he still reached out to catch the photos that floated down. The warmth of the lips still lingered on his face, and the bliss +1 floating in front of his eyes was telling him something. He turned around and saw that Deanna had turned her head to the other side with a blushing face. She was staring at her toes like an ostrich. Behind them, Luosi was stunned by this unexpected scene. "Next, I'll go next," she suddenly said loudly, quickly breaking the silence. Dake smiled and lowered one of the photos from the top of Deanna's head. He waved it in front of her like fishing and whispered, "Do you still want it?" Deanna blinked and reached out to grab the photo. She saw that the photo was perfectly printed with the moment when the girl kissed the boy. She suddenly felt an indescribable joy in her heart. She thought that when she went back, she would find a frame to frame it and put it on her bed. While she was immersed in her own world, Dake and Luosi had finished taking photos together. Then Luosi took her arm and pulled her together to take another photo of the three of them. This time, 3 photos floated out from the pages of the grimoire. Finally, Luosi and Deanna took another photo together. In this way, the 3 of them each had 3 photos in their hands. Taking advantage of the fact that there weren't many people, they quickly went into the auditorium and walked towards the seats for the first years of the Noble Academy. The auditorium was decorated with the black color that represented the Sorcerer's Academy. There were many pieces of magic items hanging on the walls. The tablecloths on the 4 long tables were replaced with dark purple ones. The candlesticks floating in the air were also replaced with simple magic claw candlesticks. The spider silk decorations hanging from the ceiling added a sense of dilapidated antiquity to the auditorium. The ghost elves hanging upside down from the ceiling like bats added a sense of gloominess. Above the stage, there were huge banners hanging. Tonight's end-of-term party was not so much a summation of the end of the school year, but a graduation ceremony for the 6th years. Like the announcement of the school championship, it was actually secondary. Not long after Dake and the other 2 sat down, more and more students poured into the auditorium. At 6 o'clock, almost all the students were seated. A sad melody sounded in the auditorium. The first years didn't feel much about graduation. It was too far away from them. Instead, it wasn't as attractive as the desserts on the table. As they ate the desserts, they curiously looked at the 6th years closest to the stage. They wondered if they would be as sad when they faced graduation. After a while, the professors in formal attire walked out from the back of the stage and sat in the teachers' seats. Tonight, the professors all had serious expressions. Even Professor Lily didn't do any work. Dake looked at the professors sitting down from afar, but he was thinking about something else. I wonder if Headmaster Aertii has returned to the academy for such an important occasion? Luosi, who was sitting next to him, asked curiously. Dake, what are you thinking about? Dake said softly, nothing. Then he turned his head slightly and saw Headmaster Aertii walk onto the stage. Headmaster Aertii, as usual, is the last to appear. Thinking of this, Dake couldn't help but smile. Although he couldn't tell if the headmaster on the stage was a real person or a clone, it wasn't that important. In the blink of an eye, it's June. It's been 9 months since the first years entered the academy. Headmaster Aertii wasn't as flashy as she was on Christmas Eve. She just stood in the center of the stage and said softly, "And our 6th years can finally walk out of the cradle that is the academy and take charge as adults. As the headmaster, I sincerely hope that after you walk out of the academy, you can display your strengths, benefit mankind, and become pioneers who lead the era to a better future. In the academy, we've experienced a lot and encountered a lot, but that's only the tip of the iceberg of the whole world. After you walk out of the academy, you'll see more and encounter more. I hope that when the time comes, you won't forget what you've learned in the academy, whether it's knowledge or spirit. Now let's talk about some happy things such as the school championship." Headmaster Aertii's smile was as bright as the moon, and her voice was as soft as the moonlight. But the happy things she talked about didn't belong to everyone. The atmosphere in the auditorium, which had been gradually rising due to her previous speech, suddenly took a turn for the worse. Everyone in the academy knew that this year's school championship belonged to the School of Magic, so the other 3/4 of the students naturally couldn't be happy. However, Headmaster Aertii acted as if nothing had happened and announced the results of the 4 academies one by one. In the end, the School of Fools was in 4th place, the School of Knights was in 3rd place, the School of Nobles was in 2nd place, and the School of Magic was in 1st place as expected. As the dust settled on the final result, the whole audience suddenly burst into thunderous applause. Although 3/4 of the people were perfunctory, only 1/4 of the people were enough to make enough noise. Dake looked at the wooden faces of the students around him and wanted to laugh, but he held it in. In short, the school championship was decided just like that. There wasn't a meaningless reversal like the first years in Harry Potter. Even before graduation, the 6th-year headmaster from the School of Magic stepped onto the stage for the last time and received a golden trophy. It was this year's school championship. It was a large replica of the Holy Grail, with the year and the name of the School of Magic engraved on it. As a student of the School of Magic who has been the headmaster since the second year, I am deeply honored to receive such a huge surprise before graduation. The headmaster of the sixth year raised the school championship trophy high, a flower-like smile blossoming on his face. I hope that after I leave, the School of Magic will not forget its original intention. Those who seek knowledge are wise. The audience once again burst into applause. When the headmaster of the sixth year stepped off the stage with the trophy, Headmaster Aerdi stepped onto the stage again. She first said a few chilling old jokes, then suddenly raised her wand and lightly tapped it. A golden light shone on the tip of the wand. Then, the golden light suddenly exploded, and a golden halo appeared on the stage. Through the golden halo, one could see the golden grail still placed in the secret room. It was one of the 3 great wishing artifacts, the wishing grail created by God according to legend, which was the Shungmalian Holy Grail. Dake still clearly remembered that there was a line of ancient inscriptions engraved on the base of the Holy Grail. The front side read, "The greedy have nothing." The back side read, "The unready have nothing." Even though there was a great distance between them, the aura of the Holy Grail was still captivating. When it appeared, almost all the students' eyes were unconsciously attracted to it, as if their souls were being sucked in. Clap. Headmaster Aerdi clapped her hands lightly, and the crisp sound of the clapping entered everyone's ears. Everyone suddenly became clear-headed. It wasn't the first time that the students outside the first year had seen the Holy Grail, but they still couldn't easily get rid of its attraction. The Holy Grail was filled with the power of wishes, rippling like wine. The deep color of the Holy Grail was like the starry night sky, mottled and sparkling. Headmaster Aerdi raised her wand and gently hooked it. Suddenly, countless strands of golden light were drawn out from the Holy Grail, converging into a glittering golden river. Make a wish, and the Holy Grail will answer your prayers. But remember, the greedy have nothing. Headmaster Aerdi waved her wand, causing the golden river to rush towards the long table of the School of Magic, illuminating everyone in the golden light. The power of wishes flowed in it, emitting a mysterious aura. The first-year students immediately reached out to touch the golden light with joy. However, the students of the second grade and above had already closed their eyes. Then, the first-year students suddenly woke up and hurriedly closed their eyes to pray. The students from the other schools could only be envious. I wonder how many people can have their wishes granted? Dark, on the other hand, was thinking slowly. The Shungmalian Holy Grail was an extraordinary existence. As long as enough power of wishes were gathered, there was even a chance of obtaining a legendary item. Although the probability was extremely low, it was still possible. But after so many years, there were very few students who would take this risk. Most students would choose the wish of magic power growth, based on their past experience. It was a wish that was realistic and had a high probability of being fulfilled. Dake had seen in the wish list that the probability of magic power growth being fulfilled was as high as 70%. In other words, as long as one's luck wasn't too bad, there would be some gains. And the small number of students would also not make a wish that was too ridiculous because of the warning, "The greedy have nothing." Damn it, my candy house. Dake automatically ignored Deanna's low muttering. He would never tell Deanna that the probability of the candy house being fulfilled was more than 80%. About 3 minutes later, after Principal Aerdi's special reminder, even the hesitant students hurriedly made their wishes. The Holy Grail behind the circle of light suddenly emitted rings of dark ripples outwards. The ripples actually penetrated the space and radiated out from the circle of light, radiating to the entire hall. Suddenly, a series of exclamations sounded from the area around the dean's table. Most of the students who made the wish of magic power growth were pleasantly surprised to find that their magic power had suddenly become active, more or less increasing. And the students who made the wish suddenly found that the thing they wanted had suddenly appeared on the table out of thin air, and they were instantly ecstatic. Of course, there were also many people who lost everything, as if their parents had died. However, there was only one chance to make a wish with the Holy Grail. If it failed, it was a failure. At most, they could only look forward to next year's school championship. When everyone slowly calmed down from the surprise, Principal Erdei began to speak again. She first congratulated the students who made their wishes come true, then expressed her regret for the students who didn't, and encouraged them to continue working hard next year. After that, Principal Erdei recounted the important events that happened this school year. She was clearly not in the school, but she knew everything that happened inside the school. In the process of her narration, she praised those who succeeded and criticized those who caused trouble. After that, she began to talk about the matters related to the 6th grade. As she spoke, some of the 6th grade students began to sob softly, and the sad atmosphere of the school gradually thickened. When she finished, she began to let the representatives of the 4 branches of the 6th grade, as well as the students with important responsibilities, come up one by one to give a speech. Then it was free speech time. Every 6th grade student could go on stage to give a speech to express the sadness of their impending departure. The whole segment didn't end until 8 o'clock. At the end, Principal Erdei took out a gourmet magic card and waved it lightly under the stage, causing all the tables to be covered with exquisite delicacies. Dinner time finally arrived. Tonight's banquet didn't have anything fancy. When dinner was over, the pastries and tea after the meal were placed on the table again, and the party entered the final individual dance segment. Everyone stood up and danced to the melody beside their seats. That was the conclusion of the year's school life, and also the farewell ceremony for the 6th grade students. There was no need to announce the end of the banquet, as the students who finished dancing all left the auditorium one after another. Dick also didn't stay in the auditorium for long. As soon as he got up, Deanna and Luosi laughed and followed him. The 3 of them decided to take a walk around the castle at the end of the 1st grade. The moonlight shone on the tips of their feet, and was stepped on. The summer night breeze made people's hearts feel warm. Dake didn't walk for too long before the wisp of blessing of the wind elves, hidden in his hair, automatically drilled out and twined around his ear. Professor Shi-Erfa's voice came out from it. Dake suddenly paused and stopped in his tracks. "What's wrong?" Deanna quickly asked. Luosi also turned his head. Dake showed an unexpected expression and said, "I have to go to the principal's office." "You're so annoying." Deanna and Luosi obviously wanted to continue, but since the principal summoned them, they could only give up. Dake said goodbye to them and walked to the principal's office in Erdei. Even Dake rarely went in and out of the principal's office. He didn't know why the principal suddenly summoned him, but he guessed that it was only for a few reasons. Besides, with Professor Shi-Erfa there was nothing to worry about. Not long after, he knocked on the door of the principal's office and walked in. 4-in-1 8,000 plus. It's the end of the month. Vote for the guaranteed monthly ticket and razor blades. If you don't vote, it will be emptied. Chapter 452. There were quite a few people in the principal's office. Principal Erdei, Professor Shi-Erfu, Professor Midya, and Ophelia Bullard were all there. When Dake pushed open the door and entered, he was greeted by a fragrant breeze. Principal Arte was the brightest moon in St. Marianne. Her silver hair, which was as pure as moonlight, matched her sky-blue eyes. She was so dreamy and beautiful that it seemed like it would shatter with a gentle touch. Professor Shi-Erfu had the unique charm of a half-elf. Her light golden hair seemed to blend into the wind, emitting the fresh fragrance of nature. When she smiled, it was like a spring breeze, intimate and warm. Professor Midya was dressed in the style of an abyss, which as usual. Her long eyelashes and light purple eyeshadow gave her a flirtatious aura. When the Blood Maiden no longer disguised herself, the contrast between her blood-red hair and her gentle demeanor gave off a faint air of mystery. It was as if there was a veil covering her that made one want to tear it away to see her clearly. When the young Dake entered, he was like a little lamb that had stepped into a giant's territory. He was about to be devoured. Of course, he wasn't a little lamb. "Dimming, you're here?" The 4 ladies sat on either side of the tea table. The aroma of black tea drifted out from the teacups. "Remember, https://m, VIP can't you?" VIP Dake closed the door and nodded slightly. "Good evening, everyone. Come and sit here." Principal Erdei moved her body to make space between her and Shi-Erfu. Dake sat down a little cautiously. It was as if he was suddenly sandwiched. The two little elves who were busy on the table quickly poured a cup of black tea for him with the teapot and teacup in their mouths. He took the teacup and took a sip. He tasted a hint of lemon. "How is it? Is it good?" Principal Aertii smiled gently. Dake was a little nostalgic. "It's lemon tea." Principal Aertii nodded. "This is the lemon tea I brought back from the Freedom Capital. It's one of the specialties there." "Headmaster, you've been to the Freedom Capital." Dake was surprised. Aertii's headmaster recalled his experience on the other side and couldn't help but smile. "Yes, I stayed for quite a long time." City Lord Munterfali was very enthusiastic. Dake pondered for a moment. "I remember that the mayor of Freedom City was once a sun warrior?" "Yes," said Principal Aertii. "She was your mother's comrade." "Well, you'll probably see her before long." Dake. Principal Aertii put her slender and fair finger in front of her lips and blinked. "That's a secret. Are you trying to surprise me?" Dake's face darkened. "Principal, why did you call me here tonight? You're not cute at all." Principal Aertii turned to look at Ophelia Bullard and said, "It's mainly to thank you for saving Bullard." Dake said, "No, it was just a coincidence." Principal Aertii shook her head. "After we won the war, everyone was immersed in ecstasy. That lingering feeling hasn't dissipated even after 10 whole years. Many of us are no longer in the state of war, so we've forgotten about the various things that happened during the war. Bullard was a pity, but you helped us make up for it." She then took a sip of her black tea and said, "Moreover, you interfered with the Demon King's suicide and reincarnation. This was very crucial. Even I didn't expect that Bullard would be able to use his connection with the Demon King to create an opportunity for it to commit suicide in the seal." Ophelia Bullard's face immediately froze and she turned her gaze to the corner. This wasn't a good compliment. Principal Aertii said, "Even in these 10 years no one thought of it, or perhaps they thought of it but couldn't do it. But that might not be the case in the next 10 years. 10 years allowed the humans who had many things to do to gradually regain their vitality. It also gave the remnants of the demon race a chance to catch their breath and gave the evil church a place to grow. Every prophet friend I've asked said that this will be a watershed. Chaos will spread once again, and it will be even more dangerous." Dake couldn't help but frown. Principal Aertii continued, "The rapid development of civilization is a double-edged sword. In these 10 years, magical engineering technology has exploded, but humans haven't been able to create a corresponding limiter. The disaster caused by this is only a matter of time." The sudden seriousness of the topic left Dake somewhat stunned. He couldn't help but ask, "Is there no way?" Principal Aertii shook his head and didn't say anything. Humans were creatures that couldn't be woken up by words. Only when disaster truly struck would they realize their mistakes. Perhaps even then, they wouldn't realize their mistakes, because it might not even be considered a mistake. From different standpoints, right and wrong had different definitions. Don't be so serious. Let's talk about something interesting. For example, the Holy Grail, or the Holy Grail. Professor Midia's teasing voice suddenly rang out, breaking the silence. When Dake heard the two words Holy Grail, he suddenly realized the real reason he was called here. He couldn't help but reveal a trace of surprise. Principal Aertii said, "Then let's return to the main topic. I called you here tonight to give you the reward you deserve. Brad's matter is the same as the previous matter. 10,000 credits and a chance to make a wish for the Holy Grail. What do you think?" Dake originally didn't think about the reward, because he acted based on his own will. Therefore, no matter how much reward there was, it would be considered a free meal. Of course he wouldn't refuse. It's a pleasant surprise. Principal Aertii smiled. "All right then, take out your academy card." Dake took out his academy card from his carry-on card bag. Speaking of which, ever since he wrote Mathematics I, he had obtained 50,000 credits. He had been spending a lot of credits, and for a long time, he had been spending them without making any income. These 10,000 credits were just enough to make up for his deficit. If the second year wanted to reopen the Magical Animal Society, it would definitely cost a lot. and the chance to make a wish for the Holy Grail was naturally a pleasant surprise among pleasant surprises. But after Principal Erdei gave him the 10,000 credits, he continued. Also, I heard from Li that you have the idea of reopening the Magical Animal Society. She suggested to me that you be the instructor of the new society. What do you think? Li. Dake revealed a trace of awkwardness for a moment. Reopening the Magical Animal Society was one of his plans, and it was something he had to do. But as for the instructor of the society, he originally wanted to find a more reliable professor, or a professor who knew more about magical animals. Professor Kazair was a good choice. Professor Nini was also not bad. But now that Principal Erdei said it in front of so many people, he couldn't refute little Li. He could only look at her and say, "Not bad, Professor Li." The corner of Principal Arte's mouth couldn't help but curl up. She then said, "The review process for establishing a club is actually very complicated. For a club like the Magical Animals Society, you must show the ability to tame and manage magical animals. You can't just let magical animals cause chaos in the academy. But if Li is here, you don't have to worry about this. When the new semester starts, you can directly look for Shi Erfu. She will help you get permission and apply for a classroom. Also, you can accept the items left behind by the Magical Animal Society." This was actually the biggest benefit. Dake immediately realized that this was part of the reward. Especially the items left behind by the Magical Animal Society, they should be quite precious. Okay. Principal Erdei rubbed his sore shoulders and stood up lazily. "Now come with me to the secret room. Do you still need the wish list?" Dake stood up and said, "No need." "Then let's go." Principal Erdei led the way to a small door inside the office. It wasn't a secret room behind the door, but a well-equipped lounge. After Dake came in, Principal Erdei waved his hand and locked the door. He then took out a golden key and inserted it into the snow-white wall. The point of contact between the key and the wall rippled like water. As the ripples spread, a door leading to the secret room appeared. Principal Erdei turned the key and unlocked the door. He then pushed it lightly, and a pure white secret room came into view. There was nothing in the secret room except for the Holy Grail, and the pillar used to place it. Dake followed Principal Erdei into the room, and once again looked at the Holy Grail from a close distance. But this time he was prepared in advance and woke up in a flash. At the same time, he clearly felt something. This Holy Grail is indeed related to greed. Dake's eyes flashed. He had some ideas about the Holy Grail's wish power. The last time he came into contact with the Holy Grail, his research on greed wasn't as deep as it was now. But now, he had already refined a magic elf like Meow Meow. If I think about it carefully, Meow Meow's treasure-gathering technique actually has a little of the Holy Grail's prototype. He touched his chin and couldn't help but ponder. It wasn't until Principal Erdei reminded him that he suddenly came back to his senses. "How is it? Have you thought about what you want to wish for?" Principal Erdei asked. Dake said after a while, "Of course, I've been preparing for this. It's a pity that the noble house didn't get the school championship." Principal Erdei couldn't help but laugh. "Are you disappointed that the first grade couldn't participate in the school championship?" Dake shook his head. "Not really, but it's interesting to see." Principal Erdei nodded slightly. "All right, hurry up and make your wish. The Holy Grail needs a quiet environment." Dake calmed down and began to make his wish. Because he had already thought about it, his wish was very direct. It was the same as the last time. To improve the technique of using the magic brain pipette. It was the same wish that he had learned the beginner-level soul loss curse by accident when he used the Holy Grail. This time, he didn't set a target and only hoped for a similar gain. If he let go of the restrictions and let the Holy Grail do as it pleased, it would be easier to fulfill his wish. As Dark concentrated, he could feel a mysterious energy emerging from his thoughts and being sucked into the Holy Grail. After that, the remaining liquid within the Holy Grail shook slightly. A pitch-black color suddenly spread out, and starlight began to flicker within it. Suddenly Dake, who had his eyes tightly closed, saw the universe's starry sky. A bright star fell from the starry sky and suddenly entered his brain. Traces of memories that he had never had before suddenly appeared, but he was extremely familiar with it as if he had already mastered it. This is... Dake suddenly opened his eyes and his eyes shone. Did it work? Headmaster Aerdi asked softly. Dake slowly said, It seems so. Headmaster Aerdi congratulated him. You've fulfilled your wish twice in a row. It seems that you've mastered the technique of making a wish to the Holy Grail. Dake humbly said, I've just touched the threshold. Headmaster Aerdi waved her wand and said, Anyway, let's leave the secret room first. She pointed at the Holy Grail, and the starry sky ripples that spread throughout the secret room suddenly shrank. The little wine in the Holy Grail quietly disappeared. The two of them left the secret room. Headmaster Aerdi pulled the door key from the wall, and the door to the secret room disappeared. She looked at Dake and said softly, How is it? Is it a wish that can be revealed to the outside world? Dake said, It's the same wish as last time, but the gain is different. Headmaster Aerdi asked curiously, What did you gain? Dake chuckled. A little experience in using the demon brain dropper. Yes, what he gained this time wasn't the advancement of the soul loss spell and the underworld spirit spell, but the technique of using the demon brain dropper. The technique of using the demon brain dropper was extremely complicated and profound. Dake had always only dared to use the most superficial, dragonfly skimming the surface of the water technique. He was also careful not to come into contact with the more profound techniques, in case he couldn't resist the temptation. But this time, with the help of the Holy Grail, he had come into contact with a deeper level of techniques. It was a technique of extracting memories on the surface. By transforming the memories into water droplets and extracting them from the surface of the brain, one could then use a little trick to make them appear on a smooth surface. Although this didn't help increase the amount of great sins that could be extracted, it was a very practical technique. Moreover, by extracting the memories on the surface of the brain, it could reduce the chances of damaging the brain. Even so, Dake wouldn't use it on himself. However, one couldn't progress 1,000 miles without taking a few steps. The knowledge and technique that came with this technique was very helpful for him to further learn the technique of using the demon brain dropper. It could be said that he had only just started learning the technique. As for the dragonfly skimming the surface of the water technique, it was just the most superficial application. Dake and Headmaster Aerdi chatted for a while in the lounge before pushing the door open and leaving. The three ladies outside the door were talking about women. Dake originally thought that Professor Erfu wouldn't be interested in clothes, bags, and the like. He didn't expect that the main topic of conversation would be her. However, after thinking about it carefully, Professor Midya wore a mage robe all day long. Although it was obviously tailored, it was still the same few sets of robes that she wore every day. As for the Scarlet Blood concubines, they didn't have the time to care about fashion in the past. Now their taste was already behind the times. Professor Erfu was very familiar with them. He casually took out a stack of outfit change cards, and there were all kinds of fashionable styles. When Dake came out, they directly tried out the outfit change cards in the headmaster's office. All kinds of fashionable clothes accentuated their excellent figures incisively and vividly. Dake's expression was slightly wary as he hurriedly said goodbye. Although tonight's harvest was unexpected, it was quite rich. However, the biggest harvest could only be received when school started in September. He was very interested in what exactly was left behind by the Magical Animal Society. It would be even better if he could find out the secret behind Peter Shelvick's ability to get magical animals. Maybe I can ask when I get home. Dake was in a good mood. If Yvette knew that he would reopen the Magical Animal Society, she would be very happy, right? Woo-woo. A little cutie suddenly jumped out from the corner and made a funny face at him. Dake was distracted and thinking, so he was startled. However, when he saw the little cutie's appearance, he couldn't help but roll his eyes. Little Lily, who was very close to him, suddenly chuckled. Then he put his hands behind his back and said, "How was it? Did you get anything good?" "I just made a wish." Dake blinked and said, "Why aren't you going in?" "I have something to talk to you about." Professor Lily turned his face to the side and said embarrassedly, For a little sprite whose face was as thick as a city wall, this was quite rare. Dake smiled and suddenly felt that something was wrong. He was too embarrassed to talk about it in the principal's office, but he only dared to block him at the door. Could it be? Professor Lily obviously saw the change in his expression and hurriedly said, "Well, next year's teaching materials aren't ready yet, right? The mathematics too you mentioned." "I knew it." Dake sighed. It seemed that he had another job to do during the 3 months of summer vacation. However, if he could get 50,000 credits for writing a mathematics I textbook, then writing a more profound mathematics too should give him an even better reward, right? As if afraid that Dake would not agree, Professor Lily hurriedly said, "Don't worry. This time, Professor Bacon and I commissioned you together. As long as the teaching materials you write are up to standard, each person will get 50,000 credits. A total of 100,000 credits. How's that?" 100,000 credits, converted into holy coins, would be 1,600,000 holy coins. And in Shungmalian school, rare items that could not be bought outside could be bought, so the value of holy coins would only increase. This deal was naturally a good price. Dake felt that it was feasible, but he still bargained. "I have a lot of plans for the summer vacation. How about this? I will be responsible for writing the main content, but you will still need to polish and most of the exercises." Professor Lily's eyes lit up and immediately patted his chest. "No problem, Professor Bacon is here." "Dake, it's a deal." Before Dake could continue speaking, Professor Lily made the first move. Then she flapped her dragonfly-like wings and happily circled Dake. "Okay, stop circling, my head is a little dizzy." Dake raised his hand to stop her and walked to the edge of the castle. Professor Lily flew beside him and muttered, "The next time we meet will be in 3 months." Dake grunted, then asked curiously, "Professor Lily, aren't you going home after the vacation?" "Of course." Professor Lily circled again and said, "This is my home." Dake was stunned. "I mean the land of fairies? It's boring there." Professor Lily waved her hand in disgust. "It's not as fun as here." Then she said, "Don't worry about me being lonely. Like Ka Zaire, Shi Erfu, and many other professors also live in the school. We always find time to travel. If you go out and have fun, maybe you will meet some famous historical sites." After saying that, she looked forward to it. Dake said knowingly, "If you pass by the royal city, just say my name. Even if you eat and drink for free, it's not a problem." Professor Lily's mouth fell open. "I'm rich." "Aha." Dake's laughter passed through the castle's window and floated into the vast sky. On the last night before leaving the school, Dake returned to the dormitory and drew out the slightly improved Pride. Then he continued to pack the rest of his luggage, including all the catgrass and worm trees, tightly packed. When he was done, the door was already filled with boxes of all sizes. There were 3 1-cubic meter boxes, and 5 smaller ones. "No one has more luggage than me, right?" Dake looked at all the luggage and was speechless. But for a magus, no amount of luggage was too much. "It's the last night." Dake picked up Chio Sea Lion and snuggled under the covers. Chio Sea Lion's smooth blue skin was cool and refreshing. It was the best pillow in summer. Ever since Dake found it, he couldn't bear to put it down and would hug it to sleep every night. June 3rd. The sky was just beginning to brighten. Dake Dimung went to the cafeteria alone to eat breakfast. He waited until 7 o'clock before he put away Paradise and the magic fairies one by one. Only the little devil, Meow Meow, the Dilu beast, the fairy Ibu, and the lion beast were left. The lion beast was dragging 2 large boxes, while the Dilu beast was dragging 1 large box. The remaining 5 small boxes were respectively dragged by Meow Meow and fairy Ibu. Dark, on the other hand, was only carrying a backpack. As for the little devil, perhaps the drone position was quite suitable for it. The common lounge wasn't spacious enough. Dake didn't wait inside, but instead waited inside the castle after crossing the bridge. About 10 minutes later, Deanna, Luosi, Dolong, and Pitten all arrived one after the other. They all lived in the capital and had a good relationship, so they agreed to travel together. "I heard that the Shungmalian magic car goes straight to the capital?" Dolong said excitedly as soon as he arrived. Deanna immediately asked suspiciously. You didn't ride one when you came to school? Dolong shook his head vigorously. No, I rode the Goblin Zeppelin here. TSK private use. Deanna stuck out her tongue. The Goblin Zeppelin was a strategic transportation tool and had yet to be used for civilian use. On the other hand, the magic car developed by the Shung Malian Academy had already completed its initial steps for civilian use. The magic car's tracks went from the northern border of the kingdom to the motorcycle town in the south. 3 magic cars would leave the Shung Malian Academy every day at 9 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The magic car's speed wasn't particularly fast. It would normally take 3 days to leave from the starting station to the capital in the center of the kingdom, and a round trip would take 12 days. Even so, it still made a huge contribution to the kingdom's transportation. This year, the Shung Malian Academy had already started planning for a second track. This second track would be built in cooperation with the royal family, or more accurately, with the eldest princess. Once this track was successfully built, the people who enjoyed the convenience would definitely acknowledge the eldest princess' achievements. This was one of the constructions that the eldest princess, Elisha, had done her best to facilitate. Ahem. Dake coughed lightly and signaled for his companions to set off. Let's hurry up. If we can make it in time, we might be able to walk around the academy town. In fact, he came to school on a flying dragon, so it was his first time riding a magic car. However, the appearance and riding experience of a magic car wasn't much different from an old train, so he didn't find it novel. Go, go, go. Doran shouted excitedly, and was the first one to walk out. Beside him was a 4-legged giant lizard with a turtle shell on its back, the tortoiseshell dragon. Although the tortoiseshell dragon was only a 2-star monster, it was quite large. It was nearly a meter tall on the ground, and its back was especially flat and wide. It was perfect for carrying luggage. Dolong didn't have much luggage, only a large box. Pixin brought a round hippopotamus, the round hippopotamus. Surprisingly, he had even less luggage. Luosi and Deanna only brought a large box and a small box respectively. Luosi didn't have a large magic fairy, so all of his luggage was placed on Deanna's spirit bear. Even though the giant bear was carrying so much luggage at the same time, it was still very calm. The 5 of them brought their respective magic fairies and quickly walked out of the castle. In the open space outside the castle, the professors had already set up a gate that only allowed people to leave and not enter. The students who had various magic fairies with them passed through the gate in an orderly manner and arrived at the teleportation square of the academy town. The Shung Malian Academy town wasn't big, and most of the people who lived there were relatives and family members of the merchants on Traveler's Street. However, even though it was small, it had all the essentials. There was even a church in the town that taught the children of the merchants how to read and write. There were only 3 places to remember in the academy town: the teleportation square, the magic car station, and Zhanqian Street. Zhanqian Street, as the name suggested, was a small street in front of the station. The goods sold in the small street were different from the normal goods on Traveler's Street. The more popular items were all kinds of convenient food and handmade souvenirs of the town's residents. As it was still early, the 5 of them strolled around Zhanqian Street for a while and bought some handmade souvenirs. Dake suddenly saw a set of Kingdom's double swords double dolls when he was strolling in a shop. He bought a set and gave the hero doll to Dolong, while he hung the Valkyrie doll on the zipper of his bag. In short, he was very happy, and Dolong was also very happy, so it was a win-win situation. About half an hour later, the number of people on Zhanqian Street gradually increased. The 5 of them ended their shopping trip and entered the station. Dolong, who saw the magic car for the first time, started to make a big fuss as soon as he came in. Then he was fiercely glared at by a senior passing by, so he restrained himself. The station was very spacious, and the waiting room was especially big. Even if all the Shung Malian students were to enter, it would not be crowded. Through the window, they could see the magic car lying quietly on the tracks. The black and heavy front of the car and the fat and short cabin were slightly different from what Dake had expected. As they were going to stay on the magic car for 3 whole days, Dake put the thinking bottle, magic brain dropper, and other items in his backpack. The catnip plants were fed a special hibernation magic potion, which could let them enter a state similar to hibernation. At 8:30, the train attendant opened the door and led the students into the station. There was no need to buy a ticket. The students were free to choose the empty seats. After carefully asking, Dake directed the magic elves to put the luggage into the cargo compartment, leaving only a small box. The box contained toiletries and a change of clothes. There were toilets, bathrooms, and cafeteria in the magic car. Because it was a special car, it was free to the students. After all of them put away their luggage, they randomly found a relatively spacious compartment and entered. The seats in the compartment were 3 in a row and 6 in a group. Each group was separated by a partition to create a more private space. The 5 of them just happened to use one compartment. Not long after they sat down, Dolong took out a magic chessboard with a smile and laid it on the table between the 2 rows. Dake, let's play a game? Set the pieces or set, Dolong hurriedly said. He was not a masochist. Dake took out a thermos flask from his backpack, put it on the corner of the table, and started playing chess with Dolong. His chess skills were not very good, but it was more than enough to deal with Dolong. While the 2 were playing, the other 3 were also watching with interest, and from time to time, they would give a few pointers. At a crucial point, there was a sudden knock on the door of the compartment. Dark, who thought it was a flight attendant, turned his head casually, only to find that the person knocking on the door was a senior wearing a second-year magic school uniform. I'll go open the door. Luosi stood up. After the door opened, the senior asked softly, "Hello, are there any seats left?" Rose turned around and glanced at Dark. After he nodded, she asked, "Yes, where are you going, senior?" Science. The senior from the Sorcery Institute couldn't help but smile. "What about you guys?" "We're all going to the capital." Luosi returned to his seat. The senior looked left and right, but hesitated. Dark understood her concerns with a single glance. He immediately got up from his seat and sat between Dolan and Pittan. "Huh." Diana couldn't help but reveal a puzzled expression. Dake smiled. "Let the senior sit on your side. 3 men and 3 women, a row on each side." "Oh," Diana replied. She then moved to a seat closer to the window. Rose took advantage of the situation and leaned over, leaving the seat outside for the second-year senior. The senior sister let out a sigh of relief and sat down before saying, "Thank you. My name is Katerina Isaiah, a second-year student. I hope we can have a good time together." Dake and the other 4 introduced themselves, and they quickly became familiar with each other. Dake asked curiously, "Senior Isaiah, signs, is that the capital of knowledge, signs?" Katerina took out a book from her backpack and nodded. "That's what the outsiders call it, but signs only has a few more sages than other places." 4 in 180-100 plus. The last day of the month. Cast your minimum monthly votes and razor blades. Don't waste them. Chapter 453. Katerina Isaiah had just passed her second year. Even though she was a girl who matured quickly, her height was only about the same as Dake's. Moreover, her barren figure made her look even more youthful. Her black hair was draped over her shoulders, and she had a flat fringe that covered the part above her eyebrows. She was very low-key and delicate. When they first met, she gave off the feeling of Winnie Scardy. However, all the top students in the School of Magic seemed to have similar similarities. Dake and Katerina chatted for a while longer, then threw themselves into the game against Doran. When he broke into Dolan's castle, Dolan, who was unwilling to admit defeat, shouted that he would win 2 out of 3 games, so the second round of the game began. Not long after, the magic car let out a loud roar, and the 2 cars trembled slightly. "Is it starting?" Doran suddenly said excitedly. Deanna leaned over the window and looked out. "Looks like it's starting." Luosi's expression didn't look too good. "After this, we'll have to ride for 3 whole days," Pittan shouted. "Isn't there a restaurant?" 3 days it is, as long as we can eat." Deanna immediately gave him a look that said, "Great minds think alike." Their eyes met, and it was as if they regretted not having met earlier. Rumble. Another tremor was heard. From the front of the car, there was a violent magic fluctuation. The light of magic spread along the chassis, and in the blink of an eye, it covered the entire magic car. Then, amidst the cheers of the students, the magic car suddenly rushed forward and started moving. The violent vibrations made the students very uncomfortable. It wasn't until 2 or 3 minutes later that the magic car slowed down, but it still shook from time to time. For people who got carsick, this was a cruel punishment from hell. Luoxi's face turned slightly pale. However, she kept a straight face and endured silently. The flashy scenery flew past the two sides of the car, as fast as time. In the blink of an eye, it was noon. Under the train attendant's reminder, the students stood up from their seats one after another and went to the restaurant closest to their seats, taking small bites of the simple meals in the car. It's quite delicious. It should be the work of a halfling chef. Dake savored the taste of the grilled steak and casually placed the pancake, the dessert, on Deanna's plate. Deanna's eyes suddenly lit up. She took a bite of the last piece of steak and started to eat the 2 pieces of cake. Pitan, who was sitting across from him, had a greedy look in his eyes. He subconsciously nudged Doran. But of course, Dolong couldn't give his cake to him, so he pretended not to see it. After lunch, the 6 of them strolled around the lounge area of the restaurant for a while before returning to their seats to take a nap. It wasn't comfortable to sleep in a seat, but the Shungmalian magic car hadn't built a sleeping berth yet. When this technology was still in its infancy, they couldn't demand too much. In Dake's compartment, Deanna gave the inner seat to Luoxi. Luoxi lay on the table and slowly fell asleep. Dake, on the other hand, moved to the outside and sat across from Katerina. Both of them were reading books. Doran and Pitan were playing magic chess in a low voice, while Deanna watched from the opposite side. The magic car gradually quieted down. Time froze just like that. The magic car passed through plains and canyons, entered underground tunnels, and crossed lakes. From the north of the kingdom all the way to the south, passing through many stations, they finally arrived at Phoenix City before evening. Legend had it that an immortal phoenix descended upon the earth and burned a piece of uninhabited land that was filled with poisonous fog into black charcoal. Then, a few decades later, new shoots began to grow on this scorched land, and it became a land full of life. So the people who migrated here set the phoenix as their totem, and even built a huge statue of the phoenix. Later, as time went on, one of the phoenix's wings was broken in the chaos of war, and the original Phoenix town became Phoenix City. The station in Phoenix City was a big one. Aima Métis and Luoboat Broheim all got off here. As a large group of people got off here, the magic car finally became a little more spacious. After stopping for about half an hour, the magic car set off again. Dusk fell. The magic car passed through the sunset and drove into the thick darkness. Dake and the others played around for a while after dinner, and then they all lay on the table and closed their eyes to take a nap. It wasn't a joke to say that the journey was tiring. Sitting in a magic car for such a long time wasn't that comfortable. At around 9 o'clock in the evening, Dake quietly got up and carried his backpack into the bathroom. He adjusted his emotions in the bathroom and took out the magic brain dropper to draw today's great sins. Especially since pride didn't have enough points, he chose greed this time. After completing the necessary procedures for every night, Dake took the opportunity to brush his teeth, wash his face, and quietly return to the cubicle. His classmates were sleeping soundly, and the little devil monster was also sleeping soundly in the middle of the table. Dake smiled and closed his eyes. As the night gradually fell, the magic car passed through the wilderness and passed through the edge of the gray fog forest. The forest ranger stood outside the railing and looked at the magic car whistling past. He slowly pulled down the brim of his hat. The thick gray fog was shattered by the magic car, and a cold aura seeped into the car. The corner of Dake Diming's eyes twitched, and he subconsciously frowned. Then he suddenly opened his eyes, and there was a strange silence around him. Everyone in the cubicle had already fallen asleep. Luoxi lay on the table and buried his face in the crook of his arm. Deanna leaned on Luoxi's body, and the corner of her mouth moved from time to time, as if she was eating something. Katerina fell asleep sitting upright, with a book on her lap. Dolan and Pitten hugged each other like a chevron, and occasionally let out a cry. The little devil, on the other hand, sat up in a daze, and his eyes were full of tears. It was as if something was missing, and it was terrifyingly quiet. After a while, Dake suddenly realized, yes, the sound of the magic car has disappeared. Did it stop? He grabbed the little devil monster and put him on his shoulder, then pushed open the cubicle's small door and walked out into the corridor. The whole car was very quiet, and it seemed that the other students were also sleeping. He looked at the window, and through the thin layer of fog, he could see a layer of dark green in the darkness. It was a forest with tall trees. As his vision gradually adapted to the darkness, the outline of the forest became clearer, and he could faintly hear the low cries of some insects. Dake turned to look at the projection screen, and the words that slowly moved across the screen clearly showed the name of this place, Grey Fog Forest. Grey Fog Forest, I remember it's in the wilderness between Flund and Bargaloa. Dake touched his forehead, and only felt that his consciousness was still a little hazy. He subconsciously took a step forward. When he came back to his senses, he was already standing at the door of the car. For some reason, the door was open, and the night wind that blew in from the outside was cold. The misty moonlight poured down, and specks of light and shadow dotted the dark ground. The railings on both sides of the track shone with clear magic runes, and 2 pillars stood on both sides. As he slowly walked down from the magic car, the cries of insects from the Grey Fog Forest suddenly became louder. Dake walked in the dark, and spied the forest ranger standing outside the track, then noticed the small house behind the ranger. The ranger raised his head, revealing a face that had seen the vicissitudes of life. "Do you want to come in and sit?" The ranger took a step back, and the small house behind him was revealed. Dake nodded slightly, and entered the house. An oil lamp was lit in the house, and there was only a bed, a wooden table, and 2 stools in the room. Outside the house was a smaller house, and the stove should be inside. The old ranger pulled out a stool from under the table, and gestured for Dake to sit down. He then poured some water into a handmade cup and handed it to Dake. Dake sat down on the stool, and held the cup with both hands, but he did not drink. When the ranger sat down opposite him, he said, "This is Grey Fog Forest?" "Yes and no." The ranger took a sip of water, and the water flowed down his throat and into his body, his throat moving. He then put down the cup and said in a hoarse voice, "Do you know why water flows downwards?" "Of course I do, but can you understand if I say it out loud?" Dake said casually, "Because people walk towards higher places." The ranger was speechless. The cries of the insects all around stopped for a moment. After a short pause, the ranger asked again, "Do you know why fire is extinguished by water?" "Of course, it's because water is a non-flammable substance, but it can also absorb heat and lower the temperature of flammable substances below the ignition point." Dake said, "Because water counters fire." The ranger was silent for a moment. "It seems that you have a thorough understanding of elemental counters." Dake said, "I've memorized the table of elemental counters." There was a heavy shadow in the ranger's eyes. "Do you know why we always see lightning first, and then we hear thunder?" "Of course, it's because light travels faster than sound." Dake blinked. "How can there be thunder without lightning?" "Gotcha." The cup in the ranger's hand instantly cracked. The remaining water gushed out from the cracks. Long hair grew on the back of his hand, and it suddenly swelled, becoming extremely thick. The swelling spread all the way up from his palm, and the originally skinny arm turned into a huge muscular arm in the blink of an eye. A hard shell-like armor suddenly bulged on his shoulder. The half of his face that was reflected in the light had unknowingly twisted into the face of an orangutan, forming an extremely abrupt contrast with the other half of his face. Roar. A roar like that of a wild beast burst out from his throat. The ranger smashed the wooden table with his palm and stood up. The sudden burst of violent aura caused the cries of the insects to suddenly disappear. Dake turned his head slightly, and the splinters of wood that flew at him cut his cheek, and a drop of blood flowed out. However, he laughed and said, "That's right. We're all civilized people, so why use words when you want to fight?" Then he suddenly jumped back and swiped his fingers across the card bag, and 2 magic cards were already clamped between his fingers. In the name of Dake Dimung, I summon, Dream Demon. As the light of summoning flashed in his vision, a dark green ghost-type magic fairy rushed out. Demonic Mimi. Perhaps it realized that this wasn't the place for a duel, but once the Dream Demon came out, it rubbed against Dake's face like a fish in water. Dake reached out and scooped it up in front of him, his expression relaxed. Although he didn't know exactly where he was, since he could successfully summon the magic fairy, there was nothing to be afraid of. As for the ranger opposite him, although he had transformed into a ferocious half-orangutan half-human appearance, he didn't pounce on him ferociously. Instead, he reached down with his left hand and pulled out a magic card from the card bag, hanging on his left leg. Without a doubt, he was also a magus. Dake's expression changed slightly and he sneered, "So we're of the same trade." The ranger spoke in a low voice with half of his human body. "I've seen your duels, and each of your magic fairies has an extremely high level of intelligence." Dake said calmly, "Since you came specially for me, you must be prepared to accept the fate of death. Death is just the beginning of a new life. The meaning of the existence of fate is to be broken." The ranger's voice was mixed with the roar of a beast. Dake said indifferently, "Then I'll die again. Activate Vampiric Mystic Ritual." Demonic Mimi. The dream demon suddenly flew forward, and blood-red liquid dripped from her body. The moment it touched the ground, it spread outwards in layers. A huge blood magic circle was quickly laid out, and the vampire's daughter, holding a black parasol, walked out gracefully from it. Blood sacrifice. Dake raised two fingers that were holding the magic card and pointed at the ranger. The vampire's daughter's slender eyes suddenly narrowed, and a trace of blood-red light flashed. Then, she closed the parasol, and the blood that flowed from her fingertips wrapped around the parasol like snakes, causing the black parasol with the fang skeleton to emit a red light that was almost black. When the blood-red light reached its peak, she exerted force on the tips of her dancing shoes, and her whole body rushed towards the ranger like the wind. The parasol in her right hand turned into a deadly weapon, and the light that wrapped around it turned into a blood-red storm, piercing towards the ranger's chest like a long spear. However, the ranger was already alert when the vampiric mystic ritual was activated, and the magic card in his hand had already lit up. Forest Beast Armor. A green light that was like a vine shot out from the surface of the card, and in the blink of an eye, it had already covered the ranger's entire body. The ranger, who was fully equipped, did not retreat at all. His thick gorilla right arm slammed out violently, trying to grab the handle of the vampire's daughter's parasol. However, when the large hand came into contact with the blood-red storm that wrapped around the parasol, it was instantly cut into countless wounds. The vampire's daughter went straight in, and the tip of the parasol pierced through the left side of the ranger's human body without any delay. The green forest beast armor could not block the attack that was buffed by the blood sacrifice. The ranger's left chest was suddenly pierced through, and a terrifying hole was formed. It's actually a 7-star magic elf. The ranger's face turned pale, but after his left chest was pierced through, he lit up the second magic card. A ferocious beast roar erupted from the gray fog forest, and the earth shook. 2 in 1 4000 plus. It's the last day of April. The monthly ticket will rot if you don't throw it away. Throw it to me, Chio Sea Lion. Chapter 454. The ranger's body didn't fall. The hole in his chest didn't seem to exist. Although his face was pale, his body didn't even sway. Instead, it was the small wooden house that they were in that started to shake violently when the roar of the beast suddenly sounded. After a few seconds, the shaking intensified and the beast's roar exploded above their heads. Dake quickly retreated from the house, and saw a giant claw descend from the sky and crush the house. Two shadows jumped out from the collapsed wooden house. The vampire's daughter held an umbrella and landed lightly beside Dake. The ranger quickly retreated to the edge of the gray mist forest. Dake slowly raised his head, and finally saw the appearance of the giant creature that rushed out from the forest. It was a giant beast that looked like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. A steel dragon. Dake immediately recognized the origin of this giant beast. He remembered the website, Vipkanchu. VIP. The gray mist forest was well known in the kingdom. It was shrouded in gray mist all year round, and there were many rare species that were theoretically extinct living inside. However, once those species walked out of the gray mist, they would quickly die. The gray mist that lingered in the forest was like the dust of time, showing the lives that had disappeared in the past. However, in recent years, more and more experts believed that the extinct species that lived in the gray mist were just the manifestation of people's beautiful fantasies. Those species were in fact just illusions that existed in the gray mist. However, no matter which theory it was, it couldn't deny the existence of life in the gray mist. They could be touched, they could grow, they could hunt, and even kill. They were no different from real life. Claire's travels clearly recorded the situation in the gray mist forest, and also mentioned the rangers of the gray mist forest. Being a ranger in the gray mist forest was a lucrative job that was passed down from generation to generation. The reason why they were able to guard the gray mist forest was because of the iron-armored dragon that was several hundred years old. As a dragon subspecies, the steel dragon's lifespan was extremely long. The steel dragon in the gray mist forest seemed to be even more special. Dake squinted his eyes and sized up the steel dragon, but he couldn't help but reveal a mocking smile. The steel dragon's eyes didn't have the wisdom of a long-lived species, only the cruelty of a magical creature. That ranger over there, Dark suddenly said in a clear voice. The forest protector, who had retreated to the edge of the forest, suddenly raised his head to look at him. His expression was unclear. Dake asked curiously, "I can see the persistence of knowledge in your eyes, but why is it that the life you created has no intelligence?" Half of the forest ranger's face instantly turned devilish. With Dake's question, he could clearly feel the change in his position. This environment was originally created by him, so he should be the one to interrogate the other party from above. However, the little Magus, who was only 12 years old at the time, didn't follow his footsteps from the start. This caused his originally unstable emotions to finally lose control, to the point that he revealed half of his evil side. Now that things had developed to this point, it had completely exceeded his expectations. Fight or flee? The thought above suddenly popped into his mind. However, the ranger's eyes flickered and he chose to continue fighting. He wanted to find out the secrets of the other party's magic guiding sprite through the battle. Thus, the battle continued. The forest ranger didn't give any orders, but the huge iron-armored dragon suddenly moved. It roared fiercely at Dake, who was on the ground, and the stench from its mouth made people cover their nose uncontrollably. Demonic Mimi. The dream demon flying above Dake's head was blown away by this breath, and immediately put on a bitter expression. This iron-armored dragon should have the strength of 8 or 9 stars when it's at its peak, right? Dake played with the magic card in his hand, completely grasping the situation at hand. The other party's goal was obvious, and they were only here to find out the secrets of his magic guiding sprite. Pointlessly summoning other magic guiding sprites would only comply with the other party's wishes. If that's the case, Vampire's daughter, I'll leave the forest ranger over there to you. The vampire's daughter nodded her head vigorously. She cherished this hard-won opportunity to fight. In the next moment, she exploded with a speed as fast as the wind, suddenly bypassing the iron-armored dragon and attacking the forest ranger. As for Dark, he activated another magic card in his hand. As for this iron-armored dragon, I'll take care of it myself. He raised the magic card, his eyes filled with excitement. Such a rare opportunity to fight, of course he wouldn't miss it. In the name of Dake Dimung, magic guiding summoning. Equip Evolve. The bright moonlight poured down, and the phantom of the moon god's soul appeared behind him, holding the silver mirror high. The silver mirror released an incomparably pure light that enveloped his entire body. He could clearly feel that his life form was undergoing a drastic change. His body, which wasn't considered tall, suddenly expanded, and his whole body seemed to have turned from a 12-year-old to an 18-year-old. A sense of arrogance that originated from his bones appeared between his brows. Around his body, pieces of silver-white armor appeared out of thin air, each of them exuding the aura of the moon god. In the blink of an eye, the silver-white armor stuck to his slender body, and the light of evolution flowed all over his body. The power that surged out of his body made Dark realize that he had successfully evolved into a moon god. The cylindrical sensors erected at his ears, and the curve of his chin formed a V-shape. A purple mask covered the upper half of his face, revealing only his thin lips and delicate chin. In the middle of the silver armor, a heart-protecting mirror with mysterious runes engraved on it was embedded. A 6-star magic guiding fairy, the moon god, had made its grand entrance. What kind of armor is this? After witnessing the whole process, the forest ranger's eyes couldn't help but widen to their limits. As the son of the Valkyrie, Dake Diming's armed card was not strange, but the armor in front of him gave him an extremely strange feeling, to the extent that his worldview was almost turned upside down. However, he didn't have time to think about it, as the vampire's daughter's umbrella had already pierced towards him. Roar! The iron-armored dragon slowly raised its huge foot, and the pitch-black shadow blocked the light. It exerted force and stomped down viciously. However, the foot that was about to crush the wooden house stopped abruptly midway. The silver moon-like radiance emitted from its foot was gentle and sacred. When the smoke and dust dissipated, the radiance disappeared. Dake Diming's moon god form was suddenly revealed. He stood casually, raised one hand, and supported the iron-armored dragon's foot. Is this god personality armament? Dake felt unexpectedly relaxed. The iron-armored dragon's strength was far from what he had expected. With the 6-star moon god's magic attack and defense values of 3,000 each, and the passive buff of his ultimate skill, god personality armament, his magic attack and defense had reached the peak of an 8-star at 4,000. However, according to his estimation, the iron-armored dragon should be an 8-star or 9-star monster. Moreover, monsters of the same level would definitely be more difficult to deal with than magic guiding fairies. This was because monsters were not as fragile as magic guiding fairies. Once their magic power was depleted, they would become empty shells. They usually had strong vitality and resistance to status effects, so they would not be easily killed. But if that's the case, isn't this iron-armored dragon also an empty shell? Dake's eyes flashed. He raised his second hand and firmly grasped the iron-armored dragon's foot. Then, he gathered all the strength in his body and suddenly roared. Ha! The iron-armored dragon, which was like a small mountain, was grabbed by the sole of its foot and fiercely thrown down. With a boom, it hit the ground. Dake's figure did not stop there. He fearlessly rushed into the suddenly stirred-up sand and dust. His tightly clenched fists were like iron hammers as he smashed towards the iron-armored dragon's chin. Bang! The difference in size between the two sides was huge. However, the difference in strength was completely reversed. Dake Diming's fists landed on the iron-armored dragon's flesh. Every punch left a big hole in its body. The iron-armored dragon, which had a shocking aura earlier, was now a little chick that could only take a beating. Dake only felt that his muscles and bones were unobstructed. The accumulated frustration in his heart seemed to have found an outlet and completely exploded. Boom! The last punch landed. The iron-armored dragon was directly blasted apart by him. The beast's blood fell like rain onto his face and slid down the smooth armor to the ground. Dake slowly turned around. Like a ferocious demon, he looked at the forest ranger who was still fighting with the vampire's daughter. Then he stomped his foot and instantly leaped out of the pit in the ground. His entire body seemed to have turned into a silver bullet and instantly pierced through the forest ranger's chest. The forest ranger, whose left chest was already open, was almost torn in half. However, he still did not fall. He only stared in shock at Dake Diming, who was still in his moon god form. Dake was too lazy to talk to him. His next punch was directly aimed at the forest ranger's face. Bang! A bloody mist exploded. The entire world suddenly turned upside down and instantly turned upside down. Dake slowly opened his eyes. The roar of the magic car instantly entered his ears. It was as if the entire world had suddenly come alive. The others in the cubicle were still sleeping soundly. If he listened carefully, he could hear soft whispers from the other cubicle. Dake was not too surprised. He already knew that the place he was in was a dreamlike place. That was why he summoned the dream demon immediately. Then he immediately confirmed that it was not an illusion, but a dream. If it was an illusion, he would be overthinking. But if it was just a dream, he could actually break free at any time. Demon Mimi, the dream demon, rubbed against his cheek. There was a trace of coolness. Among the magic spirits that were activated in that dream, only the dream demon was truly summoned. The rest of the magic spirits and magic cards were illusory. Even the little demon beast was still lying on the table without moving. But Dake had plenty of time from the beginning to the end. However, having plenty of time did not mean that it did not matter. The forest ranger should just be a disguise to hide his identity. But if he really thinks that this is the end, he is too naive. Some people, although dead, were still alive. Some people, although alive, were already dead. 3000 plus SOP, continue writing. Mayday, labor cannot stop. Chapter 455. Dake did not stop the train to investigate, because it was meaningless. The magic car was already far away from the gray fog forest when he entered the dream. Even if he returned now, he would not find anything. If he really wanted to investigate, he only needed to return home and tell his friends what happened on the way. Someone would naturally find the person and bring him here. There weren't many people who could create such a realistic dream. There were even fewer people who could accurately cast spells while the magic car was passing through the gray fog forest. Therefore, there were traces to follow from the beginning. Dake was not the kind of person who would bite his teeth and swallow it after being bullied. In fact, the reason why he worked so hard was to live off his parents in peace. However, if he said that, it might be a little too obvious. The night passed. Remember, https://m, VIP can't you? VIP. The students who were sore from sleeping sitting up were woken up by the dazzling sunlight. The students' complaints could be heard everywhere in the carriage. Inside the cubicle of Dark and the others, Dolan, who had been very interested in spending the night in the magic car yesterday, already looked sickly today. Other than Dake, who was used to the train, only Deanna was still full of energy. In order to take care of the students who were not feeling well, Deanna hurried back and forth to the dining hall and brought breakfast for everyone. However, after breakfast, Luosi could not help but vomit. Fortunately, she had prepared a bag in advance. Although it scared the others, it was not a big deal. After vomiting, she also felt a little better. The magic car finally arrived at the City of Knowledge, Signs, at 4:30 in the afternoon. Just as Katerina said, Signs was a place rich in sages. The sages of old and winter that Dake was more familiar with were born in Signs. The descendant of the sages of old, Saraswati, and the daughter of the winter sage, Winnie Scatty, both lived here. After Katerina and Dake agreed to contact each other after school started, she summoned her magic elf and carried her luggage out of the carriage. It's just us again. Doran supported his chin and said casually. After Katerina left, Deanna forced Luosi to lie down on her seat, and she offered her thigh as a pillow. Luosi could not dissuade Deanna, so he had no choice but to do as she said. But after lying down, she felt much better. That night, after Dake snuck into the bathroom, he summoned the system panel and looked at it. He couldn't help but smile. Pride had improved a lot in yesterday's dream, and it was enough for him to squeeze it out in the next 2 days. After he was done, he quietly returned to his room and closed his eyes to rest until he fell asleep. But just in case, he released Little Dream Demon. Therefore, from time to time, people would wake up from nightmares. On the 3rd day of the magic car ride, seeing that they were about to reach the royal city tonight, Doran gradually regained his vitality. As soon as he moved, there was more cheerful laughter in the room. In the blink of an eye, it was 8 o'clock in the evening, and the magic car finally drove into the station built outside the capital. Although it was outside, the scale of the station was definitely the largest in the country. After getting off the car, Dake spent some time moving all the luggage out from the cargo compartment. Then, together with the rest of the people, he led the mighty magic elves to the exit of the station. Parents who already knew that their children would come out at this time were waiting at the exit in advance, and the exit was packed full. If one looked closely, they would find that many of them were nobles of the kingdom. But at this moment, these nobles, regardless of their status, only had eyes for the children walking out of the station. A whole 9 months of separation was a kind of torture for the parents who loved their children. When the army of children gradually appeared at the corner, the parents who were waiting there were all excited. Among them, there were 2 tall men who stood at the front, and they hurriedly tried to look at the crowd. The people next to them looked at these 2 men who were famous for their bravery on the battlefield, but now they looked like ordinary old fathers. They couldn't help but feel surprised. But obviously, they didn't care about the eyes of the people around them. Not long after, Dake's group of 5 followed the crowd into the field of vision. The eyes of the lion-like man with lush brown hair and beard lit up. He raised his thick arms and waved, and he shouted excitedly, "Diana, Daddy is here!" The other man beside him just crossed his arms in front of his chest and looked at Dolong with a smile in his eyes. "Daddy!" Diana's heart skipped a beat when she heard that. But before she rushed out, she couldn't help but turn to Dake and Luosi. When the 2 of them grabbed her hand, she excitedly rushed out of the crowd. When she reached the exit of the station, she suddenly jumped into Viscount Greatbell's arms. Viscount Greatbell hurriedly bent his arm and let his precious daughter sit on his arm. His boorish face instantly melted. Teddy Dolan immediately saw his father standing beside Viscount Greatbell. He wanted to pounce on his father like Diana, but in the end he stopped in his tracks and purposely displayed the demeanor of a noble. He looked at his father with a smile, but he silently quickened his steps, revealing the urgency in his heart. After that, Pitten also began to look around, trying to find his parents from the crowd. When he got close to the exit, Pitten finally saw a chubby man behind the crowd. He quickly turned and waved to Dake and the others. "I found my father. See you at school." After that, he squeezed out of the crowd with his magic elf. Only Dake and Luosi were left. Dake glanced at Luosi, who forced a smile. "Don't worry, I'll go back myself." Dake thought for a moment. "Why don't you come to my house first?" Luosi shook her head. "No, my aunt will be worried." Dake didn't say anything else. He just asked the lion to take Luosi's luggage from Diana's spirit bear. He then nodded at Viscount Greatbell and led Luosi out of the exit. What came into view was a square dotted with lights. Outside the square, there were dozens of carriages parked in the street, hidden in the night. Dake wanted to send Luosi to the carriage and began to look around. But suddenly his arm was grabbed. He turned around in surprise and saw Luosi's surprised face. "My aunt is here to pick me up." Before he could ask, Luosi said excitedly. Her hands trembled as she grabbed Dake's arm. She was so excited that she was nervous. Dake followed her gaze and saw a gorgeous Victorian-style carriage. Beside the carriage stood a noblewoman holding a black umbrella. The noblewoman's skin was fair and tender, and the corners of her eyes were slightly upturned. She wore a black veil, so her face couldn't be seen. Beside her was a beautifully dressed little boy. He must be Luosi's cousin. Dake didn't expect Madame Flotty to pick him up personally, but this was obviously a good thing. He saw the smile on Luosi's face and smiled. "Go, I'll ask the lion to send you off." "Okay." Luosi nodded vigorously and walked quickly to the carriage. The lion carried Luosi's luggage and escorted her all the way. "Is this your magic guide elf?" When they got close, Madame Flotty ignored Luosi and looked at the lion with a frown. Luosi hurriedly said, "No, my aunt." Madame Flotty's tone was calm. "I was wondering how you could refine a magic guide elf of this level. Did you bring your report card? Let me see. Our academy doesn't give out paper report cards." Luosi was at a loss. Madame Flotty raised her eyebrows and said, "Who's that wild man over there? Do you know who you are?" Luosi couldn't help but clench her fingers and raise her voice. "That's Dake." "Dake?" Madame Flotty's frown deepened. "Dake Dimung? That bad boy from the Duke's family?" Luosi said softly, "Dake isn't a bad boy." "Forget it." Madame Flotty waved her hand. "Let the lion carry the luggage into the carriage. It's time to go back." Luosi couldn't help but look at the lion. The lion nodded slightly and carried the luggage into the carriage. Then it alighted and returned. The little boy from Flotty's family stared at the lion until it left. Only then did he turn to Luosi and ask, "Sister, did you bring a gift for me?" Luosi sighed softly and revealed a smile. "Yes." Under the starry night, the summer night breeze blew her bangs. Dake waited until the lion returned before asking, "How was it? Did you see anything?" The lion thought for a moment and chose an excuse. "It wasn't particularly bad." "That's good." Dake nodded. "Next, we should consider how to go back." The lion asked curiously, "Master, didn't your family come to pick you up?" Dake corrected, "I was thinking about how to bring these luggage back. After all, a wyvern's back isn't wide enough." Just as he finished speaking, a whistling sound came from above. A wyvern whizzed down with a gust of wind, causing many people to cry out in alarm. Dake raised his head slightly and saw Claire and Yvette sitting on the wyvern's back. Yvette St. Dimming directly leapt down from the wyvern's back. Her resplendent blonde hair fluttered behind her, and her green eyes shone brightly. Dake opened his arms somewhat helplessly, but in the next instant, he was caught by his mother. "Is this Master's mother?" The Dilu beast, who was pulling the luggage, curiously sized up Yvette. What made her puzzled was that there seemed to be something wrong with this mother's head. Otherwise, why would she keep calling out "woo-woo baby baby"? "Look, Master is about to suffocate." The little fiendish magical beast flew to Fairy Ibu's side and smirked. "As Master's magical guiding fairies, shouldn't we save him from danger?" Fairy Ibu looked unhappily at the little fiendish magical beast. Although her antennae were restless, she rationally didn't make a move. "Meow. Do you think I'm stupid?" The little fiendish magical beast saw that it had failed to fan the flames and immediately became bored. On the other hand, Meow Meow had already walked in front of the wyvern and squatted down to poke its claws curiously. He felt that these dragon claws must be very valuable, right? Only the lion beast was still thinking about Dake's question. How were they going to carry the luggage back? A moment later, Yvette finally vented some of the longing that had accumulated until now. She fiercely pecked her baby's forehead before reluctantly letting go of her slender but powerful arm. Dake, who had narrowly escaped death, hurriedly sucked in a breath of fresh air before saying with a red face, "Mom, there are too many people here." "Then we'll talk about it when we get home," Yvette immediately said. Her gaze then quickly fell on the Dilu beast and the lion beast. These two magical guiding fairies with courageous aptitude had always been quite distressing for her. Suddenly, a pink little cutie walked into her field of vision. A beautiful ribbon quietly wrapped around her finger, conveying her happy mood. Yvette immediately fell in love with this cat-like magical guiding fairy and couldn't help but say, "This is Fairy Evie, right?" "Meow." Fairy Evie cutely called out. Yvette's face revealed a trace of surprise. "It can actually talk." The little fiendish magical beast glanced at its master. Seeing that there was no change in his expression, it boldly opened its mouth and said, "Not only can I talk, I'm also Master's intimate little jacket, a professional delivery man, and a super experimental assistant. I'm amazing." "Is that so?" Yvette looked at the little fiendish magical beast and said in surprise, "So apart from being able to turn into a cat, you have so many other uses?" Yes. The little fiendish magical beast raised its head and was immensely proud of itself. The Dilu beast behind it curled its lips and looked at its back, as if it was looking at a crumb. In the end, Dake hired a carriage and stuffed all the luggage inside. Then he let the lion beast who had volunteered to guard it. The carriage driver was very happy at first when he heard that it was a mission from the Duke, but when the mighty lion beast followed him into the carriage, he couldn't help but shiver. He obediently drove the carriage to the Duke's mansion. Dake brought the rest of the magical guiding fairies onto the dragon's back. Meow Meow, the Dilu beast, Fairy Evie, and the little fiendish magical beast were all very petite and didn't take up much space. Yvette carried Dake between her and Claire. As if she was afraid that he would suddenly disappear, she held him tightly in her embrace. Claire, who was sitting on the dragon's saddle, only smiled and urged the wyvern to soar into the sky. The oncoming gale slid to the sides under the guidance of the V-shaped magic shield, forming a wind barrier to protect the passengers. The magical guiding fairies climbed onto the dragon's back and looked down, each of their eyes filled with curiosity. The buildings on the ground became extremely small and quickly flew backwards. It was their first time riding a dragon, and their hearts were filled with curiosity about their new home. They wanted to know what their new home looked like. They wanted to know their master's past life, and they wanted to know more. As their thoughts turned, the Duke's mansion was quickly approaching. 2 and 1 4,000 plus. Looking for guaranteed monthly tickets and razor blades. Continue at midnight. Chapter 456. The Dimming family's Duke's mansion was located in the northern outskirts of the imperial city. It was built facing the south with its back facing the mountains. The mansion was extremely large. There were flower beds, gardens, and even a practice field. The water that flowed down from the mountain wall in the backyard formed a waterfall. The pond under the waterfall was filled with rare aquatic beasts. Dake grew up in the Duke's mansion, so he naturally knew his family's mansion very well. He even built a treehouse on a huge tree in the back mountain. Although the wind was leaking everywhere, it was still alive. It wasn't until he was 8 or 9 years old that Dake realized that the back mountain wasn't safe. He thought it was a secret, but it was actually under the surveillance of the old butler. After the old butler retired, he didn't go to the back mountain anymore. The current Duke's mansion was managed by the old butler's daughter, the head maid Madame Jasmine. Madame Jasmine was almost 30 this year, but she didn't have a partner. This made the Duke very worried. Under Madame Jasmine, there were a total of 12 maid groups. Each group was led by a head maid. They each had different responsibilities and supported the entire Duke's mansion. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Claire rode the wyvern and flew near the Duke's mansion. Dake looked down at the brightly lit Duke's mansion, and a trace of nostalgia flashed in his heart. Website. https://m. Pip can't you? VIP I am finally home. Sit tight. Claire suddenly reminded him. Dake felt the back of his head tighten, and he suddenly felt like he was floating. Under Claire's control, the wyvern suddenly flew down and landed on the dragon taming platform in front of the door at an extremely fast speed. The guards nearby only glanced at them for a moment before turning their heads away. Their duty was to protect the mansion, not to play with formality. As for welcoming the young master home, that was the task of the mansion's maids. When the wyvern landed safely, Claire let go of the reins and clapped her hands. Then, a dragon taming guard who was waiting at the side came forward and saluted them. Claire jumped down from the wyvern's back and said to the dragon taming guard, "Get it some raw beef. Tonight it will be a good reward." The wyvern that had accompanied her for more than 10 years immediately shook its head, and was unusually cheerful. Meanwhile, Dake was also carried down by Yalvet. He awkwardly shook off his mother's arms, and pretended to straighten his collar. Even though he had already recovered his memories from his previous life. No, it was precisely because he had recovered his memories from his previous life that he was at a loss for what to do with this overly doting mother of his. Yvette was actually very weak. In the past, when he was rebellious, he only needed to say a few harsh words to make her sad for a long time. Therefore, he didn't dare to be rude when talking to Yvette. And now, of course, he didn't dare to do so. Dake took a deep breath and shook his head as he looked at the gate of the Duke's mansion. One of the 2 guards in charge of guarding the door saw him look over, and instinctively shrunk his neck. Dake couldn't help but grin as he recalled what he had done to the guard in the past. If you have the time, make it up to him. With that thought in mind, Dake waved at the magic elves. The little demon beast quickly flew to his shoulder, while Meow Meow, the Diru beast, and the fairy Ibu all came to his feet. Dake pointed at the Duke's mansion and smiled under the light. "Do you see? This is your home." The gate of the Duke's mansion slowly opened with the sound of a mechanism. When Dake came back to his senses, his right arm was tightly held by Yvette. "Let's go. Your favorite sister Olga made your favorite lamb. She promised that she would make you forget the halfling's cooking skills." Dake awkwardly rubbed the bridge of his nose and said, "Sister Olga's lamb is indeed delicious, but I might not be able to eat too much." Olga Dimung. She was one of the head maids who had been personally given the surname Dimung by Yvette, and had also inherited the name Aries. The 12 maids of the Duke's mansion were named after the 12 zodiac signs, and each head maid was a talented person personally selected by Yvette. Only the head maids who were recognized by the 12 golden armors would be given the name Dimung and become the most trusted confidant of the Duke's mansion. The 12 golden armors were armed cards, designed according to the 12 zodiac signs. Not only could they increase the user's strength and agility by hundreds of times, but each piece also had a special power. Yvette relied on the power of the 12 golden armors to become the Valkyrie she was today. However, she only had half of the golden armors in her hands, so of the 12 head maids, only 6 were given the name Dimung. Olga Dimung was the first of the 6 head maids to be recognized by the golden armors. The Ares Palace maids she was in charge of was responsible for the food supply of the Duke's mansion, which was also the kitchen. It was slightly different from what Yvette thought. Dake knew that she was an Ares, so he pestered her to make mutton set meals every day. It wasn't because he really liked mutton meat the most. Olga was chosen to be brought into the Duke's mansion when she was only 6 years old, and she was recognized by the Ares armors when she was 13 years old. She had been in the Duke's mansion for 12 years now. Because she was the youngest maid at that time, she was responsible for being the young master's playmate. When the nanny was busy, she would occasionally help change the young master's diapers or something. In short, she was such a person. Dake was pulled into the Duke's mansion by Yvette. Unsurprisingly, there were 2 rows of maids standing on both sides of the brick road. The maid in charge of etiquette, Vago, walked out of the line and said to Dake, "Young master, welcome back." Looking at the formal smile on Vago's face, Dake couldn't help but recall the painful times when she held a ruler and taught the noble etiquette. He smiled and said, "Teacher Vago, let them go and rest early." Vago couldn't hide the surprise in her heart, but she still said, "Since the young master has arranged it this way, I'll let them go back and rest." The 2 rows of maids bowed together and said in unison, "Thank you, young master." This uniform voice finally made Dake feel a little like a thug. He couldn't help but shake his head, and instead pulled Yvette to quicken his pace. After a short while, he passed through the maids' line and entered the indoor corridor. As for what the maids would say after he left, he could roughly guess. It was nothing more than "the young master is handsome again," or something like that, doghead. In the luxurious dining room inlaid with silver decorations, the Ares, Olga was carefully placing the cut mutton meat on a plate, and then put the 3 sauces on 3 small plates. Beside the mutton meat, there was a plate of pasta, and a pot of lemon tea, a specialty from the Freedom City. It was 8:40 in the evening, so it was naturally long past dinner time. The food on the table was prepared for the young master alone. Thinking that the young master would be back tonight, Olga couldn't help but reveal a warm smile. No matter how bad the young master looked to others in her eyes, he was just a mischievous little brother. From the time she entered the mansion at the age of 6 and saw the little baby carved from jade for the first time, she knew that her life from now on was completely bound to him. Whether it was the identity of a maid or the identity of an older sister, she would gladly endure it. In short, the reason Dake Dimung grew up crooked was because no one in the Duke's mansion was innocent. When Dake arrived, Olga had already been waiting in the dining room for a long time. She quickly walked in front of Dake and resisted the urge to hug him. She only said softly, "Young master, you're back." Dake pulled his right hand out of Yvette's arms and nodded. "Sister Olga, where's my mutton meat?" "It's there." Olga moved aside so that Dake could see the food on the table. Dake had already smelled the aroma of the mutton meat. He walked around Olga and went straight to the table. Olga curiously looked at the magic elves behind him, and suddenly seemed to remember something. She quickly turned her head and said, "Don't forget to wash your hands." Dake's face stiffened, but his footsteps were very natural as he walked to the washroom. After he finished washing his hands, he returned to the table and sat down. Olga laid out a napkin in front of him and quietly stood to the side. Yvette and Claire casually sat down at the table. "Little Olga, aren't you going to prepare 2 sets of tableware for us?" Claire teased. Olga was shy and her cheeks were pink. She said softly, "Aunt Claire, if you want to eat supper, I'll make it for you later." "Forget it." Claire waved her hand. "Bring me a bottle of red wine." "Okay." Olga replied and turned to get the wine. Claire took out 2 goblets, pushed one of them in front of Arvette, and said casually, "Arvette, do you want a cup?" Yvette nodded. "Sure." Claire leaned back in her chair and giggled. Drinking wine and listening to music is a pleasure in life. Since there's no music now, let's have Dake talk about the interesting things that happened in the academy to liven things up. His journey in the academy this past year has been even more magnificent than mine. Dake was smearing the mutton meat with sauce and putting it in his mouth. He said, "Aunt Claire, I still can't compare to you." Claire's eyes revealed a sly look. "Then tell me in detail." Dake said helplessly, "Wait a few days." "Okay, wait a bit." Yvette's brows relaxed and she looked forward to it. After a while, Olga came back with a bottle of red wine. She took out the cork and poured the red wine into Claire and Yvette's wine glasses. After she finished, Dake said, "Sister Olga, sit down." Olga glanced at Yvette and sat down on the other side of Dake after getting permission. Dake forked a piece of mutton meat and fed it to the little magical beast on his shoulder under everyone's surprised gazes. Then, he organized his words and narrated his several encounters in the academy. First, it was the matter of the moon goddess. Because Claire was temporarily appointed to replace Professor Didi's position, she knew more or less. And since she knew, Yvette naturally knew as well. But with Dake's narration, they gradually understood more details. Didi makes Iwe, tears of the moon goddess. So that's how it is. From a woman's point of view, I can understand her feelings of wanting to refine the tears of the moon goddess. But as a professor in the academy, she's clearly not qualified. Yvette said calmly. Dake deliberately avoided overly dangerous parts when describing the process, but as long as one thought carefully, they could make up for it. But this matter was already known, so there was no need to dwell on it too much. Instead, it was the Halloween event and ball that made people more concerned. Obviously, Yvette still cared more about her child's interpersonal relationships in the academy. Then Dake talked about the secret passage, the treasure in the secret passage, and Christmas. All of this began when Dake obtained the treasure map, made by Yvette from the headmaster of Aerti. "You actually obtained my treasure map in your first year. So, you've already broken through the checkpoint and obtained the Triad armament formation?" Yvette was finally surprised. Dake took out the wishful die, magic card and waved it in front of her, then summoned a huge die. "Do you still remember this? The die that I used at the end of the duel festival." "The one at Easter?" Yvette asked curiously. "This is actually an armament card." Dake smiled slightly, then took back the wishful die, and said, "Let's not talk about this first. I recorded all the scenery that I encountered during the treasure hunt in the secret passage. When the lion beast comes back, I'll show it to you." As he spoke, he continued to talk about the ball on Christmas Eve and the treasure hunt in the secret passage. Finally, he talked about the appearance of the vampire Vlad. Although he spoke casually, Yvette could not help but hold Claire's arm tightly. She could not imagine that her treasure had encountered so many dangers in the academy that was supposed to be safe. The vampire that was born in the secret passage was one of the Demon King's vessels. "Is this the Demon King's vessel that you mentioned in your letter?" "Yes." After Dake finished talking about the treasure hunt in the secret passage, he directly talked about the process of searching for Vlad and the Easter night ceremony. Mixed in was the speculation about the identity of the invisible person, as well as the story of the Scarlet Blood concubine. Ophelia Brad is still alive. A huge surprise hit Yvette and Claire's nerves. In the letter that Dake sent to them, he only mentioned that the Demon King had been reincarnated through a vessel, but did not mention the specific process. They did not expect the truth of the matter to be like this, especially when she learned that Dake had successfully removed the Demon King's embrace from the Scarlet Blood concubine's body, by refining her into a magic fairy and resurrecting her. Yvette could not help but shed tears of relief. The Valkyrie, who was crying over these matters, then learned that there was a high chance that the Demon King would become a retard in the process of being reincarnated as a vessel. She could not help but have a strange expression. Then, Dake slowly talked about the exam and the dream that he encountered on the magic car. 4000 plus. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.